All right, it being 6:30, I'm going to call to order a meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education. It is Monday, August 8th. We are here at the OSD Innovation Center in Oregon High School. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Bijak? Here. Ms. Garrison? Dr. Lakuta? Here. Mr. LeBrun?
Here, by phone.
Mr. Pankratz? Here. Ms. Wright? Here. Ms. Flanagan?
Here. Board does have a quorum, and because Mr. LeBrun is on the phone, everything will be a roll call vote tonight, and we have a full agenda, but before that, I will talk about, we have a proof of notice, so this meeting has been properly noticed, so we can continue there. Before I entertain a motion for the agenda, we do have a full agenda this evening. We do have 3 action items, 2 that are coming from the Policy Committee and 1 that comes from the SRO Working Agreement. And then we do have 2 things coming before the board for discussion tonight, which were motions from the July meeting regarding finances and also educator environment. So we will get to that. So I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll move that.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, Katie, could you please call the roll?
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. All right, moving on to the consent calendar. We do have 2 donations, one for $1,000 from Pure Integrity Homes for the Pure Integrity Scholarship, and then one for $100 from Carrie Majeski for the A-Team Scholarship. And then the board should have in front of them updated resignations and hires. Other than that, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
Is there a second? All right, Katie, could you please call the roll?
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison? Consent calendar.
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 7-0. All right, moving on to B, information items. Public comments, since we do have people here for public comment, I will read the public comment policy. District Policy 180.05 provides an opportunity for the public to address the board. We do value the public comment period and feedback from our stakeholders. To comply with open meetings law and to ensure consistency, public comment will have the following parameters. 1, speakers will have 3 minutes in which to make their comments. Ms. Heitz, to my right, will signal the speaker when their time is up. The board will not comment after each speaker and reserve discussion to any items on the agenda, and speakers are welcome to stay for the meeting. And then next steps following public comment may include referral to the appropriate administrator for follow-up with the speaker or placement of the matter on a future budget or board agenda. All right, so starting out with public comment, first on the list is Melissa Kingsley. If you want to come to the microphone right up there, state your name and your address for the minutes so we know that you live in the district, and then your 3 minutes will start.
Ms. Kingsley, you have to turn it on. Slide the button.
No? Oh, I have to be closer?
There you go.
Okay. Yes, my name is Melissa Kingsley. My address is 627 North Perry Parkway here in Oregon, Wisconsin. So first of all, I wanted to thank you all for everything that you do and for giving me this opportunity to address the board. I would like to talk to you tonight about the SRO portion of the meeting. After looking through the packet this evening, there are a couple of things that stand out in the SRO agreement. There are goals and strategies listed here. However, not all of the goals are listed with measurables. How will we know that these goals are being met? There isn't anything in the agreement that states what happens if they are not. For example, building a strong positive relationship with students. How is that measured? Part of the agreement includes garnering feedback. Please make sure you are talking to students who are most affected by the interactions with the SRO and not just the students that the police department decides to talk to. With regards to enhancing school safety, do we need the SRO to do this because OSD is not a safe place for our students? The appendix lists out specific training the SRO should have. While I believe the training is lacking in the amount of training that is needed, especially for our most vulnerable students, some big things that are missing are a specific timeline that the trainings need to be completed by. Also, what qualified entity is giving these trainings? And lastly, what happens if these trainings are not completed by the designated timeline? Finally, I would like to call out what I think is the most concerning part of this agreement, and that is the portion that allows the SRO to talk to a student without a parent present. Outside of an emergency, there is no reason the police should be talking to a child without a parent present. Under Wisconsin law, a police officer is allowed to lie to someone while interrogating or talking to them. This is difficult for an adult to navigate, let alone our students. I will end by asking the board to take a pause on passing the SRO agreement tonight so there is time to work through these and other items to make sure all of these details are fully fleshed out and we are protecting our students. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I too want to talk about the SRO agreement, not too much though. I am disappointed by how little was changed in the wording of the SRO agreement between July 13th and today. I had expected a little bit more. And as you are all aware, I have a lot of issues with this agreement in general, but I want to point out a couple of things. If the SRO is to act as a mentor and educator, as it is in that agreement, I think I and others would probably like to see the qualifications and qualifying degrees and licenses that go with that claim, and not just being a police officer being, partially trained to fulfill that role. Then I struggle with the fact that the district really does not properly educate parents and students about their rights as they pertain to the SRO, who is law enforcement and has the authorities of a law enforcement officer, including the ability to lie to students in order to gain information. Parents could and should be made aware of the option to restrict casual contact, for example, in classroom settings or at the lunch table with the SRO. We told the district that we do not want and that we do not give consent to these interactions with our children. And the district honors this, but people generally are not aware of this option. Parents and students ought to be educated about their right to remain silent until a representative of the family is present for any questioning. And I think these are basic things, and the fact that this is not written in the agreement, nor is it available information on the district website, is concerning for all families, and no matter how safe they think they are, because everybody always thinks nothing's gonna happen to them, and that's wrong. That's it. You bet.
Sorry, Derek Bulow. I didn't realize my mic was not on. So that was Andrea Bulow that did before. Now it's Derek Bulow.
I guess you probably can't guess what I'm about to talk about. And just for Katie, I'd like to have the minutes reflect that I'm here in my capacity as a concerned parent and not member of village board. There are there's a lot of concerns I have with the SRO agreement, but I'm just going to touch on a couple. The first is the fact that he's a full-time law enforcement officer, and in Appendix A, some of the strategies, success indicators are to wear an OSD polo t-shirt. I take issue with this because I find it camouflages the officer. If it's meant to be less intimidating to the students to make them more approachable, I think that's an admirable goal, but at the same time, we're expecting our children to realize that he is law enforcement regardless of what he's wearing and whether or not he's their mentor or not. To subject the students to a constant police presence without consent doesn't seem right in my opinion. My next issue with this agreement actually has less to do with the agreement itself and more the timing of the approval. The draft presentation of this agreement was made at the 7/13 meeting. This session is less than a month later on August 8th, which leaves the village board on August 15th to also pass this agreement. I don't think this gives enough time for substantial changes or additions, and would actually suggest for going forward to make the draft at the end of the school year, send it home with the kids so the parents can be informed about what it's going to look at the following school year. Get the approval process happening in June or July, and that way it leaves it yet another month if the village board or the school board come back with issues on the agreement. And like I say, I have a bunch more, but I'll wrap it up for tonight. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Rick Way.
Howdy. My name's Rick Way, N8721 Benson Road down in Brooklyn. Yeah, I've got more than 3 minutes worth of content, but I'll try and trim it down. Also talking about the SRO topic. Really, the previous speakers all hit on a bunch of things I wanted to talk about, so I won't rehash those. I guess I'm challenged with some of the goals here. I have a hard time understanding how a law enforcement official can also be a mentor and counselor for our students. It seems like those two jobs are mutually exclusive. The act of counseling and mentoring requires you to build a sense of trust and camaraderie with the other individual, and knowing that anything you say to that person in confidence can and will be used against you in a court of law. It just makes me struggle with what is the purpose here. I mean, if the goal is to get a security guard, let's get a security guard. If the goal is to get somebody who can mentor students about legal issues, let's get somebody who can mentor students about legal issues. If the goal is just to have a cop in the school to arrest troublemakers, well, then I guess this agreement does what you're looking for. There's a couple of parts of the contract that I think are problematic, just from a enforcement point of view. Section 7 seemed largely unenforceable. The final and the only sentence in there that was enforceable had nothing to do with the SRO. 6B seemed to negate everything in 6A and 6. There are some other sections, 8.D.4. I believe that was one that was mentioned with the school's legal counsel opting to negate the parental or guardian rights of the child. Let's see, on 9A, is there a contractual obligation to notify the parents of their child when information has been shared with the police? 9B, I think there's a typo in there. And I thought that it should be made clear that unlawful access of a computer system, such as what's described in that section, is not just an issue of revoking somebody's access, but that is either a misdemeanor or felony offense under state law. There's also some question around the stipulations of payment and employment. It might be worth talking to a labor lawyer about that to just make sure that you're not running afoul of any labor laws that by reimbursing for pay and benefits and performing performance evaluations, you may in fact be an employer of this person. Section 16 seemed to nullify much of the preceding contract. Section 17 talked about making up hours, although the expectation is the officer is already here during.
3 minutes are up.
Oh, good enough.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our public comment speakers. Is there anyone else that did not register that would like to be here for public comment and speak? Okay. Moving on to information item B2, OEA report. Is there anyone here from the OEA that wishes to speak? Okay, seeing none, then 3 student report. The students are not here, so they will join us when they come back to school after Labor Day. So we are moving on to C, action items. Number 1 is the 2022-2023 employee handbook. So I will turn that over to Ms. Jonan.
Not sure if it's. No. That way? Okay. Just takes a moment. Okay. So I know we have a full agenda tonight, and we had extensive discussion about this in committee. So I wanted to highlight the main changes in the employment handbook, but I'm happy to answer any questions about any changes that you see. So in terms of highlighted changes, we have 2 changes on 2.23 and 2.24 on page 16 of the employee handbook. And I should preface that with what we are asking tonight is that the board approve the employee handbook for the 22-23 school year. Our new educator orientation starts next week. And so the ideal situation would be to share the employee handbook with them. And we do
about an hour, hour and a half training with them on the handbook, try to make it as fun as lawyers can. And then we do share changes by email with all staff. Okay, so in terms of our main substantive changes, the first change we would recommend is section 2.23 about arrest or conviction. And we're asking employees to inform us if they are arrested, ticketed, or convicted of a criminal offense, particularly those involving minors or firearms. So one, we can offer support where appropriate, and two, where we can ensure the safety of our school community. So asking employees to report that to us. There are legal protections for employees in terms of employment matters, and so we'd certainly respect that, but we want to be informed so that we can get all of the information needed to make a good decision about our community. Second substantive change I want to talk about tonight is section 2.24, media relations. We are so proud of all the wonderful things that are happening in our school. And so the main purpose of this section is to really let people know that we have a director of communication and that she is here for support about those news stories, and that we can ensure that our student confidentiality is protected, because we do ask that in registration every year, and there are some families that are not comfortable with names or photos being shared either in the district or outside of the district. Additionally, each year we do have occasion to have one or two students that are in what's called safe houses. So we're not even aware of where the students live, and those students are not identifiable in our system. So we want to make sure that we're offering those protections. So we're asking staff that if they want to share with the media about the wonderful things that are happening in their community, that they talk with our director of communications first, so we can ensure that those are protected, and that we also have enough time to give parents notice that there might be TV cameras in the room, and they can opt out of that if they so choose. Okay. So I will move along to prep time, which starts on page 20. So we've had extensive discussion with the OEA about prep time, and we have been working to have our language more mirror what we're actually doing in the buildings. And so in terms of K4, it says a minimum of 225 minutes. We have always exceeded the minimum, so we wanted it to really reflect the minimum of 300 minutes per week. Additionally, for grades 5 and 6, the old language didn't really work for Forest Edge Elementary because that's on more of an elementary schedule. So we wanted to make sure that that language was accurate in terms of what we were doing. And so we are looking at a minimum of 375 minutes. And then for teachers who teach in both K4 and 5-6, which is new to us for Forest Edge, that we could assure them a minimum of 325 minutes, which of course the goal is always to exceed the minimum. But the OEA was concerned that, they wanted to more memorialize what we were doing. And so we're really proud of that. It's one of the selling features of our district. Okay, so I will just keep moving. Page 41.
Anna, let's wait till she's through with it, and then it's, because it came from policy, it's going to be a motion that comes from Heather because they deliberated, and then we'll have discussion. Okay?
And then for prep time, which is section 4.03.04.01, we were looking to increase the pay for IEP or 504 meetings that occur outside the contract day, to go from $18 to $25 an hour. We know these are really critical meetings, and we are appreciative of the time that staff spend in them. Of course, we would like to go higher, but as you'll hear much more later tonight, we have budget concerns, and so trying to acknowledge the importance and the time our teachers spend in those, while still being sensitive to the special ed department and the budget. Okay. And then the last change I'd like to highlight is in section 5.01.01, which is on page 45. And this is what we call job abandonment language. There is a state statute that this mirrors a little bit. And unfortunately, the past couple of years, we've had a small issue with people who accept a position and may work for a few days or a few weeks, and then they stop coming to work and don't let us know what's happening. And so just something to reinforce that employees really need to tell us when they're not going to be at work, and if they need leave, to go through the approval process with us, because certainly our first reaction is we're worried when people don't show up. But then ultimately, employees do have due process rights in our district, and so we spend a lot of time and energy on a few people just trying to get in contact with them and making sure we respect their rights. And so just feeling that it's language that we need to let people know that if you don't show up for work and you don't tell us and it's not an approved leave and we don't hear from you, that we deem you to have resigned, and we let you know that. So with that, I will turn it back over to Ms. Garrison.
Just one point of order with the action items tonight, because Tim is on the phone and because all of these action items come from a committee or a subcommittee of the board. What we'll do is we'll have the administration explain what those are, and then I will turn it over first to the committee or the work group representative that's bringing it to the board, because they've brought it to board to put on action, and then we'll go around the horn for clarifying questions or discussions to make sure Tim is a part of that. So I'll turn it back over to Heather, because this did come after much deliberation from policy committee.
Right. Thank you, Gina. The policy committee recommends that this be passed as Ms. Jonan explained the changes, so that I would make that motion.
Okay, because it's a committee motion, it does not require a second. So now we will start with around the horn, any questions or discussion. Tim, do you have any questions or discussion on the employee handbook?
I do not. All the questions that I had during the committee session were answered appropriately, and nothing was changed as a result of those questions. So I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, any other board members? Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, and I apologize, I was not able to attend the policy committee meeting when you discussed this, but I wanted to just get a little bit more clarification on the teacher preparation time. From what I understand, I guess when I first read this without having been part of the discussion, I thought maybe it was a reflection of our change in start and end times for when we passed that, because I know we extended the day and then we talked about how that would or would not impact teachers, and so I thought that's maybe where this came from, but it sounds like this may have already been in practice as far as the amount of time that was already being allocated for that prep time. Is that a true statement, that it's not changing up or down the amount of time that was available for staff?
Okay, so I think it's a hybrid. It came up first because of Forest Edge, because what we hadn't thought about was the teachers who were, or at least what the language didn't anticipate is that we had teachers who were teaching art, FIAD, for et cetera, K-6. And so really looking at what was the standard that would apply for them, because we had 5-6 language that really didn't necessarily match the Forest Edge calendar, and then we had K4 language, and how did the two intersect. So we had extensive discussions over the past year with the OEA about how we could address that issue and have the language reflect our practice. And so then as we moved into those discussions about K4 and what the minutes were and what that looked like, that yes, that the OEA wanted assurance that with the lengthening of the day, that time was added to lunch and recess, and that was time for teacher prep. And so that was our goal to do that, but with COVID and having to space out lunches and have zones for recess, that there were times of the year and have snack break, like there were times of the year that was difficult. And so we had assured the OEA that when we didn't have to have 4 lunches and not have the spacing, that we did want to memorialize that time was meant for lunch and recess and for teachers to have prep during that time. So what I would say is there hasn't been a time since I've been here that we've been even close to that 225 minutes minimum. So also from a retention and recruitment standpoint, really wanted the language to reflect the amount of time that our teachers have, because it is a talking point for me in recruiting and retaining teachers. And also from the OEA standpoint, wanting to make sure that that was maintained.
Okay. That's helpful, thank you. That really was the only question I wanted to get some answers to, so thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, hearing none. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Dr. Lakuda?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 7-0. Moving on to action item 2, policy 613, sale and disposal of school property. So we'll turn it over, I believe, to Ms. Jonan again, and then to Heather.
All right, and I should also say, I just want to say thank you to the OEA, but particularly Nate Johnson, who is their chief negotiator, because we spent a lot of time with the OEA and his committee and talking about handbook changes. So thank you to them. So in terms of sale 613, these are just really minor changes in our sale and disposal of school property. The main change is just really increasing the monetary value because things are just worth more. And this policy, those amounts haven't been updated since at least 2013. So you'll see that change in 613.02, increasing the $3,000 to $5,000 value and over. And then you will see in 6.13.08, just wanting to clarify about when we can look at disposal of textbooks and library books, that it can be that the library media specialist is still responsible to oversee that, but it can be in consultation with the director of learning and student achievement. Because I think if you read it at first blush, it would assume that the library media specialist had to do all of that on his or her own or their own. And that isn't, we would certainly assist in that process, but they would oversee it. And then in 613.10, just clarifying the definition of real property, which is an updated definition. So not substantive changes, but just trying to bring more clarity to the policy.
Okay, Heather, the floor is yours.
Yep, the policy committee makes the motion that we should approve policy 613 as Ms. Jonan described with the changes.
Okay, because it's from policy committee, it does not require a second, so I'll ask for any further discussion. Tim, any further discussion?
Nothing further from me. Thank you.
Okay, Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Dr. Lakuda?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 7-0. All right, moving on to action item 3, which is the 2022-2023 SRO agreement. So I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Bergstrom and Ms. Jonan, and then we'll go to Mary, because she was on the committee with me.
Thank you. One would think I would remember to amplify my voice after all of this time. We are happy to talk about this tonight because a lot of work has been put into it to ensure that the agreement is putting our students first and that there are safeguards and protections embedded in this agreement for and about our students, because it's about them and what they need and how to create the best environment possible. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Jonan because she has been leading this process and she has the highest level of familiarity as she is our legal counsel. So please go ahead.
So we would be looking tonight for the board to approve the SRO agreement for the 22-23 school year. The agreement does run September 1st until August 31st. So just wanted to back up a little bit to let you know how we came to this particular agreement. Is that in the summer and fall of 2019, that we had a committee, the district had a committee and the village had a committee, and we worked very hard, publicly noticed meetings to try to address some of the concerns that the community was having, as well as we were having with having the SRO program and trying to address the needs of our students in our district. So we had many meetings, and we worked together to revamp the SRO program and what that looked like. And as part of that process, there is a National Association of School Resource Officers, and they recommend best practices, as well as DPI and the Department of Justice in Wisconsin also got together and recommended best practices for schools to have a school resource officer agreement. And so we spent time looking at those organizations and their best practices in order to come to this memorandum. As well as we had a listening session in November of 2019 where we shared our thinking with the community, and they had the opportunity to give us feedback at that listening session, as well as to email or call and talk about that. So we put all of that information together, and that was really the first genesis of the agreement that you'll see here tonight, although it has changed every year, because as we go through school years and we work through problems, that helps us refine our language and our goals and our strategies. And so those links are in the presentation if you wanted to look at those. And that is really the National Association of School Resource Officers, as well as DPI and Department of Justice, recommended that we have the triad model of the educator, the informal counselor, and I don't mean mental health counselor when I say that, but really informing students about their various rights or various situations or the consequences of behavior they may be engaged in, as well as the law enforcement officer. So I just want everyone to understand that that isn't something that is unique to Oregon, that that is a best practice that is recommended by national and state organizations. So with that feedback, we have this MOU, which we do revise based on feedback that we have. And so I just want to walk through a few of the changes that we do have to the agreement based on what we've been hearing from community members. So if you go to your packet and you look at the agreement, that we did have a few changes just to clarify. So if you look at, other than updating the dates, if you look at paragraph 8, one thing that was really important from my lens, from the district perspective, was to let the Oregon Police Department and the SRO understand that during the school day that we do stand in the shoes of the parents. And what that means is that we have certain responsibilities to our students that we are required to do by law because they are trusted to our care, right, when the parents are not here. So really wanted the Oregon Police Department to understand that that's the lens through which we view every interaction with law enforcement, because we have that responsibility to our students. We also have a responsibility to have a safe school environment that is free from bullying and harassment. And so we take that very seriously. So just wanted everyone to know that perspective of paragraph 8. And so I know that there are a lot of questions, and there were when we did the community session in 2019 about when can the school resource officer interview students. And we have tried to be sensitive to that and really balance the individual rights of the students with balancing having a safe school community. So how we achieve that balance in this particular agreement is that there's really a hierarchy of when the school resource officer can talk to students. And so if there is something that has absolutely nothing to do with school, that law enforcement does not talk to our students. And I'll have an asterisk that unless there's an imminent threat or they have a warrant and then I can't do anything about that. Or if the parents prefer that. And sometimes that happens where the parents ask us, but again, standing in the shoes of the parents, then that's something that we would agree to within reason. And so just to give an example, if there is shoplifting at Quick Trip and the detective comes and wants to talk to our student, that does not happen at school. It has nothing to do with school, okay? So then if you get to, okay, well, what if the situation does involve school? Well, if the student is in any way suspected of having behavior that is an ordinance violation or is criminal in nature, and there's any potential consequence or law enforcement penalty to that student, then we do notify a parent or guardian, and they're given a reasonable amount of time to be present. And if you ask me what reasonable is, it really depends on the nature of the circumstance, right? But we've had a few occasions where if the parent isn't able to be present because they may be out of state, then we ask, is there another trusted adult that can be present? And I'm not aware of a situation where we didn't have anybody. And if we didn't have anybody, we would do everything we could to postpone it after the school day if that made sense within what was happening. Because again, we're standing in those parents' shoes, and so we don't have an interest in the student being questioned without the parent or guardian present. So then what if the student is a witness or a bystander to an event? We try to notify the parents if we can, but you'll see the agreement doesn't promise that. And there are just times when our investigation has to move really quickly. In those circumstances, we try not to involve the SRO, but if we have an example I can give, and thankfully it doesn't happen very often, but we have a situation where someone might be sexting and sending pictures that are inappropriate in nature. Our goal is to figure out where those pictures have been sent and to stop it so that they're not spread any further. And so if you can imagine, like students with phones, especially at the high school level, that can move really, really fast. And so our goal to ensure a safe school environment that is respectful to our students is we need to find out like which phones are those pictures on, and we need to let the students know you cannot send those on. Like that stops here, right? Because that is our first goal. So you can imagine if we weren't able to get a hold of parents and had to wait, that would definitely be slower. But so we try in every instance where possible to notify parents before we do that. But my main goal in this agreement is that if there's going to be a consequence to that student that involves law enforcement, that the parent or guardian is notified and has a right to be present before that happens, as opposed where the student may just have information. But again, we try to do that just with school officials and not with the SRO. And so in terms of that, but we also understand that if that happens, that the parents need to know that. And so you'll see we added in 8C that we will notify them as soon as we can and without delay. And so our administrators do contact parents or guardians as soon as we possibly can. But again, hard to put a time frame on that because it really depends on what else is happening in the school at that time. And so having like the administrators, you know, there might be something that's immediate that needs to be attended to before they're able to call home, but they all try to do it as soon as possible because they want to be the ones to share that information. They don't want the student to come home and share the information and it be a surprise. And so then that was also added to, on page 5, also to paragraph V. Because we, again, we get in contact with the parents or guardians as soon as we can. I will suggest one change to paragraph 9 because there is a typo, and thank you for that. SRP should be SRO. So I will make sure that we make that change. And then in terms of training, and I know there has been a lot of questions about this, so I'm just going to come back to that because we talk about that more in Appendix A. So I'm going to move on to Appendix A. And so you'll see that through, so this year we did meet with a subcommittee of the village and the district, going through our goals, strategies, and success indicators for 22-23. So we have 5 goals for this year with, you know, our main goal with the officer being an educational resource and educating the students about their rights and other topics of interest to the students. So you can see we have the goal, we have the rationale, and then we have the success indicators. So for example, the students last year asked for a video, and the SRO did do a video on their rights at school, and that was really popular. So we wanted to ask, so we put in there that we would do another video of topic of interest to our students. We do feel that it's important that the SRO be a person in school that students are comfortable sharing information with in terms of keeping our schools safe. And what we know about school violence is that in almost every occasion, the student had shared with somebody or on social media about what was happening. And so our goal is that the students feel comfortable with this person so they know who to report to. Because the absolute best thing we all know that we can do is prevent that from happening as quickly as possible. But we also know that in order to do that, we want all of our students to feel safe and welcomed at school. So a large part of this agreement is focused on the SRO training. So in terms of, we have a new SRO this year, although he's not new to the role. So Kyle Shuey will be the SRO. He has been our SRO before. And so you'll see his training attached as Appendix B. In terms of what we discussed in committee, that before September 1st, that he should complete the National Association of School Resource Officers course that is scheduled before school starts in Wisconsin. That is a 40-hour week-long course. He has also been to that before, but we know many things are changing in the school environment, so he will attend that as well. He will also attend nonviolent crisis intervention training with our educators. And that really focuses on de-escalation techniques and helping students remember their strategies to calm themselves so that they can engage in better choices. He also will attend LGBTQ+ awareness training, and then he will also attend threat assessment training, and so with our staff. And so that is something that the SRO does participate in, whereas if we have a student who is making threats to himself or others, that there is a required process that we have to go through, and it's required that law enforcement be a part of that. So we think it's really important that he attend with our staff so that we're all on the same page when we have those meetings. And so that'll be all completed in August. And Kyle has also completed other trainings, which you'll see in Appendix C, and he was hired at the end of May. And so he has had he's had only a few months to complete those trainings. So you can see the extensiveness of the trainings he has been through. And then during the school year, what we'd like to try this year is we have a pathway, we call it, that's our professional development for our new educators. So we would like him to participate in that where it makes sense. So just for example, if they're doing how to make the math curriculum more accessible to parents, let's make that, then, that's something he wouldn't need to be at. But if we're doing mental health first aid or trauma-informed practices, then he would be present for those sessions. And that is a pathway that occurs throughout the year. We're also have agreed that he will go to the trauma-informed investigation offered through NAMI, and that is something that the previous SRO attended and completed and found very helpful. So we've agreed that he will attend that as well as continued training on working with our students with disabilities, mental health concerns, anti-bias, and other identified needs. So any training that we have, and you'll see that in the agreement, on equity or trauma-informed care that our district does, as part of our school staff, he would participate in that as well, absent an emergency in the community. Trying to see what else I missed. And then any other, we frequently have training opportunities that come up throughout the year. And so that is something that we would be talking about with the chief, that if there are appropriate trainings that we would want him to attend with our staff. And they have been a very good partner with us in making sure that those trainings are attended absent emergencies. And then in terms of school safety, and we've completed one already, is that one of our goals is that we will have a tabletop simulation at least one per school year. We did complete one at our high school, and that's where we run through an emergency scenario, and we make sure that everybody is clear about their role and what to expect so that we can be prepared and help keep our schools safe. And so that is something that he, in August, did take one of the lead roles in talking about what the school resource officer role would be if there was a threat to our school. And so he would be participating in that and collaborating with our director of safety and transportation. And then goal 5 is that we added to the agreement to be sure that the district leadership would garner feedback about the SRO program with our students, staff, family, and community. So this is not something that the SRO would be involved in, but we as district leaders would take the role in this, where we would review the data and making sure that we don't have a disparate impact for our most vulnerable students in our school, that we would conduct focus groups with our students and our student groups to get feedback about the SRO program, that we would include it in questions about the program in the family surveys, that we would, if approved tonight, we would add a feedback mechanism on our resource page so that people, if they had an interaction with the SRO, that they would know a place to go to. And so we really want to make sure that it is a welcoming presence in our school. And so we have implemented different ways to get feedback individually as well as in groups, as well as from our other stakeholders. And I know that certainly Dr. Bergstrom or I are always open to feedback about the program and how it can be better. So I know I just went through a lot of information. So with that, I will pause and ask Dr. Bergstrom what I missed.
I think you were very thorough, so I don't think there's anything you've missed. I think there's just a couple of things I will underscore that you already said, and that is the SRO is a valuable resource, but the SRO is, it's very infrequent that they are actually brought into situations, because they are brought in when their presence is necessary, but not when it's not necessary. So I think it's important to note that our administrators, in consultation with our legal counsel, are able to determine when this is a necessary action and when it simply isn't. They're not treated as trained counselors or trained educators. They're treated more as guest speakers. So I think that's important to note too. We don't expect them to be teaching classes or assessing students. They're brought in when it's appropriate. And when it isn't, they aren't. And this agreement also allows us to put in safeguards, because some of our students will have interactions with the police, but this agreement allows us to positively influence any interactions the students may absolutely have to have due to any type of suspected behaviors. So it really allows us to form a positive partnership with the police department so we can work together to protect our students, as opposed to being two separate groups that really aren't on the same page regarding how to meet the needs of young people who have developing minds and need to be treated like young people with developing minds who are bound to make mistakes along the way.
Okay, I will now turn it over to Mary, because Mary served on the work group with myself. So, Mary, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So one of the suggestions I heard tonight, I agree with actually many of them, but one that should be hopefully fairly easy to do is in Appendix B. It would be helpful to understand which organization hosted the training. Is that something that we could incorporate?
I can work with the village on that.
Okay. I think that would be a beneficial addition. And then I think that the MOU as it stands is definitely imperfect. I think it provides, however, a structure and a benefit to our students, as Dr. Bergstrom was just saying. And so I think there are improvements and progress that we should be working toward. I would like to see more community engagement in the process over the next year to develop a stronger MOU. And from my perspective, I see that there are a lot of things that have gone into over the last year, assessing the pros and cons of even maintaining an SRO contract. But one of the biggest benefits that I see is that it does afford the school district the opportunity to clarify boundaries and responsibilities for the school district and the police department, and provides guideposts for when these two intersect. And so, for example, in, I think it's 7, I gotta find it. The meet and consult. Is that in 7? Yes,
Yes.
the meet and consult process. That's a big benefit, as I see it, to our students, because with this MRU in place, if a student becomes part of an OPD investigation, OPD will reach out to the district. And the district will work to ensure that all of the relevant parties are included and discuss the approach to conversations and best suit them to our students. It also reinforces the reliance on school disciplinary procedures in many types of what otherwise could be considered a violation. And so there are components of the MOU that I really feel look out for the best interest of our students. One component of the goals from last year I feel was really incompletely addressed was around garnering feedback on the SRO program during the course of the year. And so while the school district actually sought feedback from our students, especially our at-risk students, there were no formal assessments. No community input was garnered by any of the parties involved. This now has been added as a goal, goal number 5, if memory serves. And so obviously that will, it will develop over time, but I think that is an important component to the MOU. And then training. We've had a lot of conversation around training. I think that it's critical for training for this position. The SRO must be aware of how to appropriately handle situations for adolescents and for young kids, because it's not how they're trained. They're trained in the larger community. But again, this is another benefit that I see to having the MOU, because we can help define what that training entails. We can help to ensure that the SRO receives training that brings that perspective to the police department. And so at this point, I think the district has identified training that meets the bare minimum of where I'm comfortable having the SRO in the school district. The training, obviously, with a brand new SRO is very limited, and I look forward to when it's bolstered. This was something that I had brought up last year as a concern. I think the possibility for turnover and then the need to retrain a new SRO. I would encourage the village to consider incorporating additional training such as this for all of the department to bolster their perceptions and their interactions with the entire community. But as it is, our MRU just takes, has oversight to the SRO. So while it's imperfect, with the incorporation of the changes, I move that it be adopted by OSD.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. I will now open the floor for discussion and questions. Tim, would you like to go? Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
We sure can.
Excellent. First of all, I am well aware of the growing challenges associated with what goes on in school on a day-to-day basis. We see it throughout the year, whether that be on the news or in local social network postings and things like that. Growing challenges associated with vaping and bullying, fighting, drug use, and gang activity. And it's important to understand that while not all of these challenges are present today, we as the board want to be sure that we are doing everything in our power to be aware and to be vigilant in order to recognize and address what can quickly escalate to challenging activity in and around our school facilities and activities. And that's not always easy. Secondly, I see our SRO as an extension of our educators and educational systems. Much like our food service providers, our building and ground staff, and our bus drivers. They are an important element to the education process. Third, this is an important partnership with the broader community. We are responsible for the safety of our kids. The question came up earlier, is the Oregon school an unsafe environment? It is not an unsafe environment. And one of the reasons for that is because of all the other activities that are taking place. The engagement with those adults beyond just our educators, and certainly our educators, are a very important aspect of that safe environment. If I look at, as we raised our kids, and we have 4 kids, for those of you who don't know, we have 4 kids, and we're now grandparents. And during the time when we were raising our kids, we grew in a keen understanding of building strong, positive relationships with each of our kids. And communication is at the forefront of that relationship. And so I see the agreement, this SRO agreement, as an extension of that involvement using positive, present relationships built on communication, especially in an educational way and in an educational environment. With that said, I'm sure it's crystal clear to everybody that I am not a lukewarm supporter of this SRO agreement. I'm a very strong supporter. But I am also a strong supporter in the understanding that it's a continually evolving relationship and document. And I support the regular review, the need for annual or even more frequent public review and comment, and discussion and approval through the board on an annual basis. The last thing I want to mention is that it's my understanding that Kyle Shuey is going to return as the SRO for this coming year. Kyle, in the past, has done an extraordinary job building relationships in our schools. And when I think of an SRO, I think of Kyle, because he has done such a great job. And so I'm really looking forward to having him back at school this fall. And I look forward to the continual evolving relationship and document. That's it for me.
All right, thanks, Tim. Go ahead, Heather.
I have a few comments mixed in with maybe a question or two. Thank you, Gina, for walking us through that, especially the part on the parental involvement. I had a couple of questions after reviewing before this meeting, and I think you did a really nice job of explaining those updates, and so I appreciate that. That was one of the areas of questioning that I had. The second part is, and I'm sure this has been thought of, but it's more just for my own information. I understand that the MOU might be for 1 year, but is there anything that, in terms of turnover, is there anything that we've done to explore a 2-year, not a 2-year MOU, but maybe the position being a 2-year something, or something, just to have that consistency? So I'll pause there if you want to answer that part.
Sure. So even though the agreement is a year, it doesn't mean the SRO person is only for a year. So we had a 1-year agreement to give us time to get that feedback and to change the MOU in response to situations we might have that maybe we didn't think about or the MOU wasn't clear. And so in terms of the turnover piece of it, that my impression, although I don't want to speak for the Oregon Police Department, is that there are opportunities for growth for their officers. And so it is something where there might be a promotion. For example, I think it's Sergeant Hatfield now was our SRO, right? And then he was promoted. And then Kevin Gowan was our SRO. He's now a detective. Alex is becoming a field training officer. So I think it's a function of having those openings for promotion in the police department, not that people haven't been happy in the role. Sure. And I'm appreciative of that those officers are still with the Oregon Police Department because they understand the meet and consult process, and they have done an excellent job of calling me or the principal, who will then call me to talk through that they may want to interview someone at school. And then we know that we can make sure that we are protecting those students and parental rights to make sure that that process is done appropriately. And since they know that, they often won't even ask, in terms of they know, okay, it's outside of school, we're not even going to call the school. And if it's not clear, they will call me before coming to the school, which is really helpful because then we can navigate anything in advance. We can call parents or guardians in advance, and then we can set up support systems. So if parents say yes and parents are only available at 1, then we know, okay, you can't just send the student back to class as though nothing happened, right? So we can make sure student services is there to support and navigate that. And so that has been really helpful from my lens. Not so helpful that it's turnover in the position, but at least helpful for that there's other law enforcement officers in the police department that understand our process and understand our role. And that we are not here to be easy questioning for students, right? We are an educational institution, and we are respecting but we're also respecting the parents' rights if that's something they prefer. Yep. So, so we're hopeful that Kyle will be with us for more than 1 or 2 years, but that isn't. I wouldn't ever begrudge somebody for wanting to pursue other opportunities, right?
Yep, that makes sense. This is probably a difficult question to answer given the balance of privacy and reporting out, but I guess going forward, I wonder if there's a way to share in a non-invasive way what the actual work or work product of the SRO is from us, looking backwards, how the breakdown of time, and I'm not asking for, anything that would breach privacy, but just, is it that there were, I don't even know, whatever the work buckets are of the SRO, it would be helpful for me at least to understand what that looks like. That would help me have a better idea of what the SRO program is. So that's something for going forward. I think this has changed from the last year because I remember when we looked at this last year, I didn't like it, so I'm just going to say it again, but I didn't see it in here this time. Is I completely understand that this is an Oregon Police Department officer. I I have an issue with that they carry a gun in school. So I'm just going to state that for the record. I don't think I saw it in print this year, which maybe that's by design, but I'm not a fan of that. And I just also wanted to say that I recognize that the SRO would be a trusted and positive influence for my family. And I know that that's not the case for every family. And I know that we're also very much committed to making sure that we're doing whatever we can to make sure that that happens. But I just want to continue to acknowledge that because it's easy for me personally to say, yes, that's a trusted thing and my family has a great, relationship, but that's not the case. And so I just want to, as we do, make sure that that's at the center continues to be at the center of what we do. And then the last thing is actually tangible for going forward. I would love, I'm not going to say how exactly it should be executed, but some sort of community information session. When I saw that first slide of 2019, completely recognizing that 2020 and 2021 were not very conducive to community information sessions. And whether it's that or whether it's sharing out, but I do think there's something that can be used, A, to garner feedback, but to bring parents along on the ride and to continue to educate the families and communities what the SRO role is and how it plays in our school community. So that's something that just going forward I'd like to ask as when we talk about our equity and our social emotional learning that we continue to bring parents along. I think it would be great to do that on the SRO.
Well, and I think that would be helpful too, because just in terms of one thing that came from that feedback was that people felt uncomfortable with the officer wearing the uniform, and that was really the genesis of the polo. And I also in the thinking was shared is that would seeing an unarmed officer in the building in uniform would be possibly invoking trauma for some of our students, and so it'd be interesting just given everything that's happened to revisit and if it's if people aren't comfortable with the officer being more casual, that is an easy shift, right? So that would be interesting to get the community feedback from my perspective on which is more preferable.
All right, any other comments or questions? Go ahead, Leslie.
Okay, so it's a few. I don't know who I'm asking to, but I'm just going to say. So it had the 2019 date, but we have previously, longer than that, had an SRO in our district, yes or no?
Yes, and I would turn to Mr. Weiland, but I believe at least 20 years.
Okay, so at least 20 years. What was significant about the 2019 date on the slide then? Is that just where our data begins as far as changing this agreement with the village, or how does that work? Because if we've had it for 20 years, it had to have been evolving all this time.
Yeah, I would say we had a few challenging situations where we felt that we really weren't on the same page with the police department in terms of how different situations should be handled, and felt that it would be really helpful to have a more detailed agreement as to how exactly we would approach each situation, because otherwise, wanted to be proactive rather than always trying to react to a challenging situation, and really wanted to be on the same page where we could about the mission and values of our school and as our partnership with the police department. So just really trying to address some challenging situations that came up. And I would say, and one thing I'm proud to be a part of in this district is that we don't make those decisions alone, that we talk to our stakeholders. And so that was really the genesis of working with the village, having public meetings, talking to our staff and our students, and then having the culmination be the feedback and the informational session in November.
So the 2019 date was after all of those community sessions that had occurred and worked through, and that's where you came up with the initial.
I would say yes. I mean, I think we spent 18 months. Ms. Lanigan was part of that process, but 18 months, yeah.
Every month or every 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, it was a pretty seminal moment. We went for a while without an SRO agreement, so I think that was a watershed start for this agreement, getting better.
All right, and then another question I have is that, and you may not have this information, but how many districts, school districts in Wisconsin have SROs, specifically districts of our size?
So that I don't know. When I was looking at the National Association, I believe it was 70% of districts nationwide, but I don't know in Wisconsin. I can see if I can find that information.
Okay, and then, I read this and I don't remember how does their cost break down for who's paying for the SRO?
So we pay for half of the salary, and I believe that the last few years it has been a little under 35,000.
Okay. And then this is kind of referring to Ms. Garrison's mention of not liking the idea of an officer carrying a gun in the building, and which I agree with. And you made the note that because of community sessions and stuff, that's where the polo evolved from, and seeing
Yes.
an unarmed officer. So what is the status right now? Is the status is the officer is unarmed in the building, or is the officer armed but just doesn't carry it, out in the open?
Yes. So the officer is authorized to carry, I would say, a revolver. So it isn't a rifle. It's a handgun. I don't know. I'm assuming that they carry when they're in the building, but I don't know. So it isn't prohibited. What is prohibited would be any type of rifle. But that is something that we had extensive conversations about. And the Oregon Police Department is uncomfortable with having a law enforcement officer in the building that isn't wearing standard police equipment.
Then my opinion is that an officer should probably be in uniform, because if they're going to be assumed to be a police officer with standard police equipment as a gun, any type of gun, whether it's a rifle or a revolver, I don't really care. I would assume that our students would look at it just slightly different if they knew that that person was carrying. In my opinion, not everybody may think of it that way, but I think that some of our most vulnerable students might, and I think they likely do. So that's just my opinion on that. Then the other one I was looking at was back in Appendix B. Sorry, not B. Under where the SRO training completed prior to 2022-23. And it talks about, it gives a list of when they were, or when Kyle was, or Officer Shuey was trained on different things. For example, racial bias on 2017, crisis intervention in 2015. How often are we requiring retraining on that? Because as you stated, things are changing. There's new and updated information on things like that all the time.
Yeah, so the SRO would have the same training as our educators in terms of when the district is offering the training, then as part of our school community, the officer would attend that as well. So in terms of how often the police department requires that of their officers, I don't know, but I can find out.
And we're requiring that of our teachers on a yearly basis?
We put a significant emphasis on our equity training, yes.
Just seeing if there's anything else. I guess I do want to just say that I'm still slightly uncomfortable with it, because I think that there are better ways we could be looking at reaching our students, but I do also understand that this is a way that a good chunk of our country has gone to having officers in our schools. I don't know that it's the best way. I think that moving forward, that as communities, that we could find a better way, and this is no disrespect to our police department, because I think they do an excellent job, and I think that our educators in our building do a really great job too. But I think that it's a mashup that doesn't necessarily always work correctly. I think that there's better ways to move forward. I don't have all the answers, obviously, but I think there has to be something, because obviously this is a situation where it does ruffle a lot of feathers, and it does put some students at an inconvenience compared to others. And we all try not to do that, because we have a really big equity policy here in our district. And I know that our intent is to make sure that we all feel equitable, but I wonder sometimes if we having that officer in the building, plainclothes or not plainclothes, if that makes us not exactly be equitable because of some of the biases that our students have grown up with, whether that by our fault or not. So.
No, that makes sense to me. I would say in the last 3 years since we've revamped it, the highest value I see on having the program is that we are able to partner with the district and have a lot of conversation about who we are as a district and what we stand for. And so just, you know, as legal counsel, that we can't direct staff that they can't call the police, right? If we have parents visiting and they see something, we can't tell parents, you can't call 911, right? And so, and our students unfortunately are, you know, going to be, like, there's going to be things that happen that they're going to have to interact in law enforcement, you know, and I wish that I could take that away and I can't. Like, I know that we're going to have students who are survivors of certain things, right? And that are going to want to talk to law enforcement. And then I also know that our students are going to make some choices that might involve law enforcement. And so the highest value I see in having the agreement is that we are clear with the police department about when that happens and what that looks like, and that we can be proactive and not having to navigate that when we have a stressful situation. So knowing that we're going to be working with the Oregon Police Department, whether we have a program or not, I think that we have the best memorandum that we can in terms of trying to balance the individual rights of students and the collective, you know, safe school that we also owe our students. However, that is a community and board decision in terms of, and so I'm looking forward to this year and getting that feedback that was built in as part of the agreement so that we can either make the program better or we can find another path.
Leslie, any other questions or discussion?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. Troy, go ahead.
Okay. So I just want to start by saying I really appreciate the public comment on this issue tonight, as well as all the subcommittee work that's gone into this. It's been a lot of parties have been involved, and I really appreciate hearing from the community on these important issues. And I really like what Heather said, and I want to echo what she said about acknowledging that, you know, my family does see police officers in a positive light, but I do recognize that not everybody has that same feeling. It's been touched on a few times, but, you know, there really is a bit of a rocky history with the school district and the Oregon Police Department in terms of the school resource officer. And it wasn't that long ago when we started the school year without an SRO contract in place. And we've made a lot of advancements since then, and I really want to continue to improve that. And I love that we are revisiting this contract every year and continuing to evaluate how it's working for both parties. And I'll accentuate that the agreement really does have those safeguards, and it allows us to form those positive partnerships with our students. Those boundaries and those guideposts are really, really critical for when the SRO and the school administrators intersect. I've been witness to some of those interactions, and I've seen the very fierce positioning that Ms. Jonan, Mr. Pleiner, Dr. Anderson, Dr. Bergstrom have taken, and I hope you don't take offense to the word fierce, but you have been very fierce proponents of protecting our students and adhering to the agreement. And we are in a much better place now because of some of those very difficult conversations that we've had to have in the past, and I think that our partnership with the Oregon Police Department is better than it was, and I think it's getting better every single year. Really appreciate the meet and consult process. Again, I've been witness to that on the periphery. We can't talk about those specific cases because it involves student privacy, but it's a very important part of the process that I believe is working well. I did want to touch on measurables. I do really like to see measurables, and I understand that this is a difficult aspect to measure oftentimes. But one thing that I did notice is that in the summary of how the school resource officer uses their time, building relationships is by far the leading type of contact with students by a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 margin. So that really tells me that the effort is largely proactive versus reactive. And that's a measurable, one measurable that I would like to continue to monitor is just how that resource officer is using their time. I'm supportive of this agreement. I feel that we are a safer school district with the SRO contract than without. Believe that officer that's trained in crisis response is a benefit overall for for the school district, but I do still understand that, you know, there are some challenges, and some of our students and families do have challenges, and I want to see us continue to work through those. So.
All right, thank you, Troy. Anna, I believe you're the only one left.
Thank you. I have a quick question on, I guess it's section 8, and in letter F, it talks about the SRO. I guess there's a page 5. It talks about the SRO may use their cameras or other recording devices only to record audio or video and performance of their duties in accordance with village policy or state law. I'm just curious, does our SRO wear a body cam and or use a body cam when they're interacting with students in a situation that isn't necessarily the community building aspect of their role?
So the intent is no, that the SRO does not have the body cam on, because the only time I'm aware of that they would turn it on, and they are listed here, but where they have is if they're investigating potential criminal activity, and with juveniles they're required to record those, but that would be in the privacy of their office or somewhere else. You know, they wouldn't be doing that in common areas and recording. So there are laws about when they have to record, and we tried to build those in here. And so certainly, and I don't think there has been a time that I have seen Alex in the building where he's been wearing the body cam, unless he's in uniform and has just come from somewhere, and then in which case he's walking in the building and then he'll take it off.
Sure, okay. I mean, I think that can offer a good, it's not a bad thing to have a body cam, right? So that if anything does happen, there's video of that interaction with the officer. So I don't think it's a bad thing. I was more or less wondering what the policy was related to that in the schools. Secondly, I guess I'd like to understand what the role, if any, the SRO has with expulsion hearing decisions. I mean, from what I'm hearing, that really is kind of a separate administrative task, and it does not necessarily involve our SRO. I guess I'd like to understand a little bit more about that interaction.
Yeah, so in terms of the school decision and that process, the SRO would not be involved. Now, if there is a separate reason for a criminal investigation, then the Oregon Police Department would undergo that, but it doesn't necessarily have an impact on expulsion, as you know from doing expulsion hearings. So I wouldn't say there would never be evidence that would come in, but we haven't had one yet in 10 years where we've had evidence from the Oregon Police Department that has been relevant for our expulsion decision.
And then I guess we heard from some of our speakers regarding the lack of information or lack of access to what the rights are of students and families. Is there any way where this information is posted? I mean, I know our SRO agreement is on our website, but could there also be links to what those rights are for families or students to have that resource readily available?
There's
looking for that?
Sure, there's oh, go ahead.
It's on the website already?
There is, and we can add, there's a Department of Justice, like school safety manual, so we can certainly put that up there as well.
Okay. In general, I really feel like this agreement does a good job of balancing kind of the things that we've been talking about tonight. And I do think that there's value in having the SRO in our schools and building relationships and having that role within our schools, creating a safe environment. But I also recognize that can be challenging for some of our students. And so from that lens, I feel like the training that we're focusing on and the information that's being shared with the actual person, the officer, the SRO individual who's in our schools is better informed on what we value and what is important in this district and in our schools, and really defining that role and ensuring that it is equitable and that it is, understanding that biases exist, but being able to be aware of those and be trained in how to be aware of those. I really feel like, I really do think that this is a good balanced approach to having both of those situations in our district. So I will be supporting this. I do think, I do love that there's a fifth goal to do that community engagement. And I do think that there would be value in looking at, you know, a timeline that could go through this at an earlier stage prior to entering school in September, because you know, it gets into a time crunch. And so I do think that that might be valuable to just shift the timeline for when we are doing this process to allow for all of that good community feedback to be incorporated as we make decisions going forward.
I will say that the work group does meet in April, and so we start this review process in April, and so that's an open meeting. All board members are welcome. Mary and I serve on that group, and committee members are welcome too. So I would encourage board members, like you do other committees, to attend the SRO work group meetings, because we have pretty in-depth discussions.
Great.
Mary, go ahead.
Sorry, I had one more thought. So one of the comments from the public was around lying to students. And I know that's something that we've talked about in the smaller meetings. Can you speak to that, Gina?
I can speak to it in terms of the law, that it is accurate that there are court cases, even the U.S. Supreme Court, that has confirmed that police officers can lie as part of an interrogation technique. So that's accurate, that is legally compliant. Now, it certainly isn't a technique. I mean, in terms of, you know, our administrators and trying to investigate, like we are built on relationships with our students and our families.
Right. No, and so, yeah, I mean, from the perspective of the memorandum, I mean, what is in here with regard to what the SRO can do is basically based on precedent law. Is that?
Yes, I mean, the MOU is legally compliant. You know, is that something that's addressed or prohibited? No, it isn't.
Thank you.
All right. Any other further questions or comments? Okay. I'll just give you a couple of my comments. I'm not going to repeat what everyone has said. I've been involved with this for a long time. And I know that doesn't mean a lot to say that we've come a long way, because this is very personal to a lot of families. But it does mean something that we have come a long way with the police department. And so why I support this agreement, because I think it is beneficial for this community that the Oregon School District has a formal relationship with the police department. Leslie and I met with the village administrator and the village board president and talked about equity and their support of the SRO going through equity training, the police department and equity training. That is something that's very important to us in the school district, and they confirmed to us that they are committed to that. And so that's why this is really important, that this is an agreement that binds at least one member of the police department to go through equity training and to be involved in what we do here in this school, and I think that's a benefit to this community. Troy, I really appreciate what you said about the woman that's sitting right there. She spends a lot of time on this agreement, and she is an advocate for our students. And if we did not have Gina, I would trust this agreement, but she is somebody that we can stand behind with this agreement to be there for our students. Now, that doesn't mean we're perfect, and it doesn't mean things don't happen, but we are very happy to put in this agreement direct feedback mechanisms and further meetings, and so we're getting closer, and we are never afraid to hear from people about things that we can improve upon. And not everybody can say that. We are not afraid to hear that. We get emails, we have people come here and speak. We are never afraid to hear that. So I want people to continue to do that, because we are not there yet, but we're getting closer all the time. So that's why I support this agreement as well. So Katie, can you please call the roll?
Dr. Lakuta? Yes. Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak? Yes. Ms. Garrison? Yes. Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Wright? Yes. Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 7-0. All right, moving on to discussion items. We'll go to committee reports. 1, policy. Heather.
Our next meeting will be in September. We just reviewed the policy, the handbook, employee handbook, in 6/13, so I will have an update in the September board meeting.
All right, thank you. Vision steering. Troy.
Vision steering did meet, I believe, last week. I was not present at that meeting, but the only agenda item was the next one on our agenda, which is OSD planning for the future, so I don't think we need to cover that as a committee report. we are looking to potentially schedule another meeting in August.
All right, thank you. Okay, next up on the agenda is D, discussion item 2, which is OSD planning for the future. If people recall, in our July 11th meeting, we had a motion that asked the administration to come back to us with 2 things. One is a plan to address our financial health, and 2, educator environment. And so we're going to start with that first part of that motion approval, which is OSD planning for the future, and I will turn it over to Dr. Bergstrom.
Before you do that, President Flanagan, I just want to recuse myself. So as most people know, my wife Kelly is a longtime district employee, currently on leave and not receiving pay or benefits. However, there's a high likelihood that she's going to return to the district. Therefore, I'm going to recuse myself from the discussion on this agenda item because you may be discussing figures that would directly impact my household income, and my discussion could be considered a conflict. So I will step away from the table.
All right, thank you, Troy. So Troy will be stepping away from the table from any discussion or any vote on upcoming finances. So thank you for doing that, Troy. Okay, Dr. Bergstrom, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So as many people know, we have had community information sessions that were planned throughout last week, and we have another one tomorrow at 6:30 at Rome Corners. And so this evening, as part of our planning for the future, I plan to go over some of that same information. And for all of you board members who have been so wonderful in attending every session, I apologize, you'll hear it all again. But there may be people who are watching through the streaming service who haven't heard this, and we want to make sure we're getting information out to as many people as possible. So I'm going to start by going through the presentation that we have gone through with our community. And that really starts with the idea that it's long been agreed upon by the school district and the community that a mutual goal, something that's important to all of us, is having the best educator in every classroom. And that's important because we know that the educator in the classroom is what has the greatest impact on student success. And so this is something that we have spoken about in multiple community engagements over the course of many years. And I think this is something that we all agree upon. However, there are some issues that are now connected to and causing challenges in continuing to retain the excellent educators we have and attract new ones as it's needed. And the most important piece of that is really related to state funding. So one of the key features that we need to understand is the impact on school funding over the course of time in the state of Wisconsin. So in 2002, we were number 11 in the nation related to school spending, 11% above national average. Well, by 2020, we are now 25th in the nation connected to state funding and are 6% below the national average, which is actually the largest drop in national ranking of any state during this time period. And what's really important to know is that the 25th ranking, doesn't even include the last 2 years of a 0% increase in state funding for schools. So we've dropped considerably in national ranking related to school funding, and that does have an impact. It has an impact on our operating budget, because 90% of our operating budget, which is about $55 million, that's determined by the state. We don't have any say in how much money that is. And they do that through setting the revenue limit and for per student funding. Now, the other 10%, we don't really have much control over that either, but we're just talking about the impact of state funding at the moment. Now, of our whole operating budget, 80% of it is actually spent on what makes the most difference. And that is the factor is the adults who are in the building with us. So that's 80% of our operating budget, which is about $49 million. Now, for the last 2 years, with the inflationary period that we have been going through, there's been no additional funding. So all of our costs have gone up, but what we are able to spend has remained stagnant. So what does that look like in a gap? And how has this been historically? I think that's probably one of the bigger questions to ask. If you look back at 2014, 2015, this is where the graph starts. You see the blue line is the consumer price index, or the basic measurement of inflation, and the orange line is the percent change in per student funding allowed by the state. So you see in 2014, it's very, very tight. The state funding is rising or falling based on inflation, and that stays relatively tight right up until 2021. And that's when you see the percent change in state funding go to zero, and you see the CPI go up rather sharply. At the top, you see some dotted lines, and that's because we don't yet know what the CPI will be for 22-23, but we know it will be between 6.24 and 8.04. Consequently, we have that space up at the top. But the big piece to notice is basically the gap between the percentage in state funding and the CPI, even at the lowest projected level for 23-24. For 21-22, it was a $2.9 million gap. For 22-23, it could be either 3.6 or 4.8. That's a significant amount of funding. So how is that already impacting our educators? If we want to remain a destination district, and we've received some really great questions about, well, what exactly is that? A destination district is when people who are teaching elsewhere apply for positions here, or when new educators who are just entering the profession, they hope they get a position here. Or families choose to move here specifically for the schools. All of those things make us a destination district, and we currently are, and we want to maintain that status. And a big way to maintain that status is to maintain our current high staff retention rates. When people are with us, they stay with us. However, we haven't been able to offer compensation in the last 2 years that have kept up with inflation, and we have not been able to offer pay raises that are competitive. So if you look down at 21-22 in the chart below, you see the consumer price index. There's a little asterisk by it because that is actually the number set by the Bureau of Labor Statistics for bargaining units. So they know exactly what the average CPI was for that time period, and it's actually called the CPIU. So for 21-22, it was 1.23. But because there was no additional funding from the state and costs were increasing, we gave a $0 increase to teacher-based pay. In 22-23, CPIU was 4.7. That's the upcoming year. If things stay as they are, we will be giving a $0 increase to teacher-based pay. In 23-24, we don't know what we will be able to do. It will depend on the next state budget and the decisions that the board makes. But right now, we're 5.93% behind what we would normally have tried to do. So what is really the bottom line of all of this information? Because the point of this brief presentation in our community sessions is to give participants a common base of knowledge that they could then start to ask questions regarding what they're hearing and what they're understanding. So the bottom line is this: if we wish to continue offering the highest quality education and services to our students, we have to keep and attract the excellent educators that we currently have in an increasingly competitive market, because it's not just what we're paying our wonderful current teachers, but it's also the number of people who are entering the profession overall. Both of those things together, the decrease in the people becoming teachers, have made this a highly competitive market. So how do we keep them and how do we attract them? By offering competitive salaries that allow our great educators to continue serving the OSD. So what have we done so far? We've continued budget review and analysis to find ways where we can save money from our operational budget. We've changed health insurance. That wasn't necessarily a popular decision, but it was a fiscally responsible decision because by making the change, we saved approximately $600,000 over the next 3 years. We also used our one-time federal funds, or ESSER funds, we use those one-time funds for COVID-related expenses and for positions that supported students in the impact of the pandemic. So we did add student mental health positions. We did add academic support positions. That was the intent of the ESSER funds. Those aren't permanent positions because it's one-time funding. And we have also looked into the impact of being able to restructure our debt. So we've been able overall to reduce expenses by about $2 million with that effort. What are other districts doing? Some of them are choosing to use the one-time funds for operations, which is a solution. It just is a solution that creates an even larger fiscal cliff 1 year down the road. Some are choosing to reduce services and staff, which leads to increasing class sizes. Some have decided to go to operational referendum next April, and some have decided to go to operational referendum in November. Specifically, what have some of our neighbors decided to do? Well, Middleton has made the decision to ask their community for $4.9 million over 4 years. 24.9. Ooh, big difference.
Andy perked up on that.
Yeah, he surely
Let's make
did.
sure you get that amount
I
right.
can feel him moving over here. Verona is asking for $19 million over 4 years. Some Prairie is discussing this tonight with their school board, but their ask at the moment that they're considering is $9 million over 3 years. Wanakee is discussing tonight also, and they're either thinking of doing $6 million over 3 or $10 million over 5. And Belleville's already made the decision to go to referendum for $1 million. So people are making these decisions. We also looked at some of our other neighbors, and some of them have recently gone to referendum for a variety of reasons in 2020, 21, or earlier in 22. Consequently, they will, if their referendum that they just did doesn't address this issue, they will need to be going out again soon unless things change drastically. So we've had some really interesting conversations during our community engagement focus groups. We've had 4 sessions so far, in addition to a staff session. We have one more tomorrow night. And while they haven't been as well attended as we hoped, we're certainly getting good information from these conversations. And participants have placed a really high priority on some of the things that we think are important too, like continuing to attract and retain the very best educators, keeping class sizes similar today, continuing some of the one-time funded positions, such as the mental health positions that we've added, and adjusting staff salaries to keep up with inflation. The people who have attended believe that the district's budget needs to be addressed, the operational budget, and that we should be competitive. We should be able to offer a competitive salary with our other districts. And we understand that when people stay, it's not only about money. It is about money because you have to be able, as an educator, to pay your bills, but it's about other things too, and that's why the board asked us to address the other side to it. What other things make people stay? And I'll be talking about that a little bit later in the presentation. Because for now, we're going to talk about some of the referendum options that have been explored, and Gina will begin that discussion.
Okay, thank you. So we wanted to give the board 3 options to think about tonight, looking at going to an operational referendum for salaries and compensation. And so in terms of what goes into those options, I just wanted to walk through the 3 of them. So option 1, as Dr. Bergstrom stated, the past 2 years, we have not had any increase to our teachers' contracts in terms of their base salary. And when I say base salary, I mean the amount on their contract. And so other school districts have added to base salaries. And so what we had talked about was that we would look to add a 1.23%. That was the CPI for 21-22, and then looking to do the 4.7% CPI for 22-23 as an increase to those contracts for staff in terms of teacher salaries and wages for our other staff. And so other districts have been able to implement the 4.7% as of July 1. We have not made any decision as a district for 22-23. So option 1 would be just adding those CPI amounts to salaries and wages in year 1. And then we made the assumption that in year 2 and year 3, there would be a 5% increase. Now, in terms of what CPI is projected, 5% is below CPI. So we've been very careful to talk with our staff that over the past 10 years that we can't promise CPI because we knew at some point there might be a possibility that CPI is higher than we are able to afford. So just know the estimate in year 2 and year 3 is 5%, which is well below. I think January just came out at 7.1%. So that would be part of option 1. So just those CPI increases as opposed to a 0. And then another portion of option 1 would be to continue those student support positions that we have funded one time with ESSER money that Dr. Bergstrom noted. We also would be look at the students' clubs and activities. We haven't raised the compensation for those activities in quite a while, and we know when we talk about with our students what's impactful for them and the whole child value, that those clubs and activities are really impactful for our students. So we'd like to look at compensation for those as well as increasing what we're able to offer because we haven't been able to fund new activities for our students. Also looking at an increase for our bus contractors as part of our, with our bus drivers, because if you've been following the news of other area districts, we did not have the challenges that they had because we really have contractors and drivers committed, to our community, and we have a really unique structure. So we wanted to make sure that we're able to fund paying them, because without them, I'm not sure how our system would run. And then also, we are looking at a budget shortfall for 22-23, and so looking to fill that budget shortfall. So option 1 would do all of those things. Looking at option 2, you'll see, and so that's $8.9 million over the 3 years. So moving to option 2, we would include all of those items in option 1. However, you will see option 2, the recommendation is $11.4 million. And what that would allow us to do is to make market adjustments for educators and staff, which as Director of Human Resources for 10 years, I would say is really critical for us to be able to do. Looking at option 1, it is becoming more challenging to attract people to our district. Every educator that I make an offer to has multiple offers, and we have been lucky that we've been able to stay competitive with our schedule, but having a 0 the past 2 years has been really challenging. And so, it hasn't happened often, but it's starting to happen where we are not, we are on the lower end of making offers to teachers, and they have gone with other districts that can pay more. And I would also say our current staff has been wonderful in terms of staying with Oregon because they know we're engaged in long-term planning. And so we still have an excellent retention rate, and we're still able to attract excellent candidates. But I am afraid that if we don't make some market adjustments, given that we've had 0 the past 2 years and other districts are doing the 4.7, that will change, and that our educators will start to look at other districts as opposed to staying here. And we know there is a significant cost to losing educators to other districts because we invest very heavily in our teachers and their professional development, as well in those relationships that are built with students and families. And so I would strongly recommend that we have market adjustments for our educators and staff so that we can be competitive and stay competitive with other area districts. And then also wanted just to share a third option, which is the $13.2 million that has all the items in option 1, but would allow us more compensation to make higher market adjustments. And I would say, I don't like to speak for other schools, but right now I would say Verona is really a leader in compensation. They have EPIC, we don't. have that in our district. And so option 3 would put us towards the higher end of the market. I'm still, not able to really do what Verona's been able to do for their staff. But, that would just be more higher market adjustments for our educators and staff. And so, and also understanding that we don't have EPIC and we have to be fiscally responsible to our community. So if you were to ask me between option 1, option 2, and option 3, where would I like to be? Well, as an HR director, would love to be here and recommend option 3 to you, but also understanding that we don't have the tax base. And so I would say going with option 2 would between having option 2 and our culture, I think it would make us highly competitive with area districts, and we would be in a wonderful position to retain the excellent educators that we have, as well as continue to attract the best educators who are coming into the profession. So in terms of, not yet. So in terms of what that means to our community, I would turn that over to Dr. Weiland to talk about the impact, unless you want me to answer questions about option 1, 2, or 3 before we move to that area.
Let's get through the slides and have Andy kind of explain the budget, and then we'll go around. Robin, in terms of the room, can ask questions, but let's get through all the materials first, and then we can go through the questions. How's that sound?
Sounds great. So what we tried to do here is give a projection of the actual impact to a homeowner. That's a little bit different than a lot of our neighbors have done. So we feel that it's a very conservative way to approach this. And we're looking at kind of assessed values. We're looking at protected, what's called new construction, something that you might have heard me talk about when we looked at our debt service strategies this last fall. What we're trying to do, go to the next slide, sorry. And I apologize for all the small print on this, but there's a ton of assumptions that have to be made in this because we are projecting out for 3 different years. So the first thing that we wanted to call attention to is that the district is trying to mitigate this impact to our taxpayers. 2 ways that we're doing that. We are starting to, or reducing the amount of debt service that we are projected to make this next year by $1.4 million. And then, as Dr. Bergstrom talked about a little while ago, we also changed our health insurance. And because of that change in health insurance, we project that that should save us over about $600,000 over that same 3-year period that we're talking about. So we're kind of bringing to the table, if you would, about $2 million in savings that otherwise would be a larger impact to our taxpayers. So like I said before, the impact here is by year. I believe it's a conservative way to look at this, which means that the impact should be at minimum the average what our taxpayers would see. So in year 1, it would be $118 per $100,000 as assessed value. And then year 2, $88. I'm sorry, I've jumped to option 2. Option 1, $79. Yeah, year 2 would be an additional $70, and then year 2 would be $47. And you kind of get the idea. 118 the first year per 100,000. Year 2 would be an additional $88, and then year 3 would be the $64 additional dollars, and then 160, 99, and 67. So a little bit different than what maybe other districts are looking at with mill rate. That is information that we'd be happy to provide as we go through the informational campaign, if we decide to move forward with the referendum at that time. But making lots of different assumptions here are related to the next state budget, our student counts, and our equalized assessed values, as well as new construction over the next 3 years to kind of come up with these numbers. But it gives a good idea of what the impact is for the average school district taxpayer in the Oregon School District could be seen. Average means that there will be people below and people above, but that would be the average. And with 10 different municipalities in our school district, there is a lot of different variation that could happen. What questions do you have for us?
Okay, that's a lot of information. It's the first time that we've seen the options with dollar values attached to them. So I will take whoever would like to go first. Go ahead, Heather.
Gina, can you go back to the maybe 2 slides before this? One. Went a little too far. The ones with the market adjustment, the 3 options with that. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the budget shortfall bullet in option 1?
I can talk about that.
Okay.
If you recall, last year, 21-22, we actually used some one-time money from the governor to kind of balance our budget. That was around $300,000 to $400,000. In addition to that $300,000 to $400,000, we also have seen, which we talked a little bit about over the last several months, increases in fuel costs associated with natural gas as well as for bus driver diesel fuel. And those things are, I mean, we can say we're not going to include them, but we're going to spend it. So we've included those two things in there. So we're looking at about a $650,000 impact, a shortfall, before we provide any raise to any of our employees.
Okay. And then on the, sorry, I apparently need glasses. On the market adjustments for educators and staff, does that staff then, is that including the substitute teacher? Is that including all, not that all wages would go up, but I know we've been talking about especially the substitute teacher shortage and how that plays into the pay. So is it things like that that would be included in that market adjustment bucket?
So in terms of the calculation, not necessarily. We have raised our substitute teacher pay as well as added our building substitute positions. So the last 2 years, those have increased while our other staff wages have not. So I do feel like we have funded those in advance. Now, you know, it doesn't mean that we won't have to make market adjustments for our substitutes, but we would have to find that internally from some other place in terms of a reallocation. However, thank you for pointing that out because I should have added that option 3 would be continuing our building substitute positions in terms of with the referendum money. We started in 21-22 with the building substitute positions to try to address the shortfall. That has been a significant expense for us, although definitely a worthwhile one. And so given that our COVID, you know, as a community isn't decreasing, we did continue those positions for the 22-23 school year, but it wasn't meant to be a permanent position because we don't have available funding for that. So option 3 would, and that's part of the reason for the increased amounts, is it would keep those building substitute positions at each of our schools.
Gotcha. Do you want only questions? Or comment? Okay. Thank you. First of all, this is a huge undertaking. I have no doubt that you all have put in countless hours. And so just to even get us to this point, to be able to kind of clearly understand what our options are is an undertaking. And so thank you. Man, I usually try to start with a positive, but this is just so dire and so, dire. And that I'm so, those numbers are huge, but also so necessary. And so even when you think about, forget about option 1, 2, or 3, just the fact that, you know, the worst case scenario is, or the lowest amount is still $9 million. That just goes to show what a disaster state funding has been and what it's doing to education. And so this isn't even yes, we want to do these things to make ourselves better and continue to be a destination district, but without it, it's a nightmare to think about what happens if this doesn't pass. So, or this idea of doesn't move forward. So it's just really scary. And I know you all live and breathe that, but it's just the putting actual numbers to it and what that comes with those numbers is very, even more eye-opening than it was before. So.
Tim, I'm going to send it over to you so I don't forget you on the phone. Go ahead, the floor is yours.
Great. I just have a couple of initial questions, and I may have others as others are speaking. With regards to any of these budgets, it's my understanding, and I just want to confirm this, we're not talking about adding a bunch of positions here. We are literally trying to fund the positions that are currently in place, albeit we did add some positions with one-time money last year, and we want to maintain those positions. We would not have hired for those positions if they weren't important. But other than those positions that were hired with one-time money, because we were in a pinch, we needed those people, and those were the only dollars that are available. These dollars, all three of these options, do not include any additional people. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, other than the ESSER position you identified.
Very good. Okay, and that was my understanding, and so I think that's more an educational confirmation than anything. That these are not wish list. Folks who are positions we would love to hire on. These are positions that are currently in place that we just want to maintain. Secondly, and again, Gina and Andy, I know this takes a tremendous amount of time putting these together, and the input, Gina, that you have with regards to hiring and keeping the best people we have, that anecdotal information is super important. The Madison School District announced this afternoon that they continue to have now about 140 unfilled positions in the district, which means they are beating the bushes of districts like ours to find people to fill those positions. And if we start seeing some of our best teachers, any of our teachers, slide into positions that go outside of our district, it is a long road back. And we don't want to be in that position. The best teacher in every classroom is cultivated over a long, long period of time. And when you start losing that traction, it is a long road back, because it becomes a snowballing activity, really. One thing, Andy, that I'd like to confirm with you as well. If we move ahead with any of these three options, we always will have the option to not levy all of those dollars when the state comes back to the table. They have told us over and over again that this year we are, all districts across Wisconsin, it's not just Oregon, are being asked to fund with local money, period. And so when the state comes back to the table and begins providing year-to-year increases, as they always have, we will have the option, if those dollars begin flowing back in as they should, to not levy these dollars if we choose to move forward with any of these options, if we don't need it. In other words, if the state comes through and funds the way they always have going forward, we will have done what we could to plug the hole in the dike for the time being, but we will have the option to back off on those levies if we don't need the money in the future. Is that correct?
You are absolutely correct.
Okay, and I think that's very important for everyone to understand, that it's not going to be money on top of state money when state money returns to the pool. So that's important to understand. So I just needed those few confirmations just so I had a firm understanding, and for educational purposes for those who are listening who haven't been as in-depth in these conversations as all of us. I'll hold other questions because I'm sure everybody else has some great questions, and it may spawn other questions that I have as well. So thank you, Kristen.
All right, thank you, Tim. Good questions. Who would like to go next? Anna, go ahead.
I will echo what other members have said. This is a tremendous amount of information, a huge lift for our administrative team, and thank you so much for putting in the time and the energy and providing us with this really important information. With that said, I guess I do have a couple of questions regarding some of the buckets that we talked about in the options 1, 2, and 3. I think it's the previous slide, maybe. Just a quick question on the student activities staff. So I want to make sure I understand that the intent obviously is to provide additional compensation, but does it also allow for additional activities to be added? Because I know that we, as we talked about, it's a huge part of the whole child. It's a huge part of how our students interact with their teachers and their classmates. And so I'm just curious if that would also allow for additional activities to be funded based on interest and staff being wanting to do that.
It would. We've had a number of teachers ask the past few years about adding clubs, and we ask that they start them and see if there's interest. And usually it's generated from the students. So before COVID, we had a really popular swing dance club that the students asked our teachers to do, and they need adult supervision. And so we had 2 teachers who volunteered to do that, and it was very popular. Then we had the pandemic, so we weren't able to continue that. But that's a great example where if that club had continued, we had budget shortfall. We wouldn't have money to compensate. So then the teachers have to pick between volunteering their time or not having the activity. And that's not a position that we want to put our staff in, especially when we hear how impactful those activities are to our students. And we also have a number of teachers who volunteer their time to do clubs and have done for a long time. And so we would like to compensate them for that when they have successful clubs. We've also seen a really big increase in 5th and 6th grade and having clubs and activities there. And almost all of those are voluntary. And so you think about how impactful that is to start engaging students in 5th and 6th grade and have them be excited and have those relationships. So, we would like to be in a position where we can fund additional clubs and we could provide, some additional compensation. Many of those clubs take a long time, and, we're looking at our schedule is, $800 or $900 for the year to run those clubs. And that hasn't increased in at least 6 years.
Okay, thank you. Another question I have is, you did mention that some of the people that we are looking to hire here have multiple offers. And I think I heard you say that we're on the lower end of making those offers. And I know that historically, this community has passed a referendum in the past to support teacher compensation. And I think at that point we were a leader, I think, in compensation. But it sounds to me like we might be falling behind. So I guess I'm curious, with the market adjustments that are reflected in option 2, if you can identify what positions were the least competitive in as far as our neighboring districts, and what those market adjustments, which of those areas I think really need those market adjustments the most based on how we compare to other neighbors.
So I can answer that in really thinking about it in 2 different ways. So I always look at in the market, what are the hardest fill positions? And so you look at how many openings there are district-wide and how many people there are in the state with that particular licensure, right? So if you look at something like technology, education, and agriculture, there are many more positions than I think when we looked at it 2 years ago, there were 5 people in the state graduating with tech education and 17 openings. Right? And so for me, that's definitely a hard to fill position. So how other districts are addressing that is that some districts are paying different amounts for different areas of the profession. And so that is an approach that we have not taken. We have really been true to our schedule. Because we do have excellent educators who have been very loyal to our district and taught here for years and years, right? And that it just didn't feel comfortable to me to pay a teacher more in a hard to fill position than our other teachers. So we have remained very true to our schedule. And so I would say that, yes, like in 2016, when we revamped our schedule and the community supported us, that was a complete game changer for us. And we were definitely the leaders. Other districts have caught up to us, and I am worried that they're going to start to surpass us. And so, for example, we were able to hire an amazing tech ed and agriculture teacher this year because we have an outstanding culture and we were still competitive. We weren't the highest and we weren't the lowest, you know, in terms of talking to her about making an offer. But if we can stay close, then I do think our culture can make up for a number of those things. But the farther you get away, the harder that is, right? So if I say, okay, we're competitive within $1,000 or $2,000, our wonderful culture, you know, I think it can balance out. But if we start to say, oh, now we're $8,000 to $10,000 off, it's just a little bit harder depending on what your household circumstance is. So I would say another area is definitely special education. People have multiple offers, and you know, we were able to hire a special education teacher recently who had 5 offers, and so I am not shy anymore. I just ask, you know, where are your offers and what are they? And if they tell me, great. And I also want people to be happy. So I don't want people to come here and be unhappy, because it's not, they vest in us and we vest in them, right? So that doesn't do anybody a service. But I do want to talk with them, because this is my job, about let's look at the offers and let's, you know, compare year 1 and year 5 and year 10 and year 15, and then let's talk about the intangibles, because I want them to make the best decision for them. And so I do feel like I'm getting a lot of information from our candidates, and that's my job, to make sure that we stay competitive. So, you know, again, with our special education teacher, we weren't the highest and we weren't the lowest. And what we're able to do in terms of supporting our teachers and those intangibles that we offer, you know, that has been the tipping point for us. And so I want to ensure that we can continue that in our community, because with those 2 zeros that we did and other districts not doing that and other districts doing the 4.7, and we have a shortfall. So without a referendum passing, we can't do that. So if you look at 3 years of not being able to do anything and other districts able to do things, we're going to get farther and farther apart. And so I worry about all of that work and leadership and investment that we've put in, that our teachers are going to look elsewhere, because there aren't enough graduates in education to fill all of the openings we have in Dane County.
Thank you, that's helpful. I understand from Andy that the numbers that we're looking at here have taken into account a restructuring of the debt issuance, so that we are already accounting for some savings that we have within our current budget to provide for numbers that have the least impact on the levy or not the levy, but how much we would go over as far as the referendum question goes.
Yeah, we would. We've been prepaying some debt, or planning to prepay some debt, and so we would be able to stop doing that. And because we stop doing that, that would create some flexibility for us in our levy for this next year.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And the numbers that you reflected, as far as the estimated cost per 100,000, takes that into account.
Absolutely.
That's what that's doing. Okay, thank you. I guess I'm seeing that we're looking at a kind of a 3-year scenario here. I do have a question whether we are talking about a recurring or non-recurring. Would this be a recurring referendum or overage, or would it be a non-recurring?
So, as you just mentioned, you have 2 options there. I think our recommendation at this point would be to look at recurring. If you do non-reoccurring, you are creating another fiscal cliff for yourself at some point in time, where the idea would be that we would be using recurring expenses associated with using these funds, and so to stop being able to levy them would create a problem for yourself down the road.
And it does kind of get to what Tim described, that we would not be required to fully exhaust what we have for an overage. You know, we would not have to levy
every year you guys get to decide up into the amount of authority that you have. You can always go with less authority.
Yep.
And there are provisions to basically maintain that additional authority for future years. There's some strategies that we would look at when you get to that point, but you have that ability.
Okay. Those are my questions for now.
Just before we move on, I would like to piggyback on Anna and maybe have Andy explain. You know, we are beholden, as we've talked about in earlier slides, how much funding is controlled by the state, 90%. So can you kind of share the philosophy related to this that gives us actually more local control of the budget of our school district. I think that's really an important point, kind of on top of Anna's
Yeah.
point.
For educational purposes, your only real ability, other than having additional students, is the authority that's granted within, over the last 12 years now, or 10 years now, any authority to put into a state budget or by going to referendum. So those are the only avenues that you have to have additional funding for educational purposes. So, you know, what the state seems to be telling us over time is that if you want additional dollars, that is the avenue that's available to you, is to go to referendum. So it feels like that's what the legislature is looking for us to do.
Okay, thank you. Who would like to go next? Mary, go ahead.
Thank you. So Gina, I know you mentioned that options 2 and 3 have different market adjustments for our educators and staff. I'm hoping you can give me some sense of the magnitude of the difference between the two options and understand where that will place us with respect to our neighboring districts. Specifically, for example, the more challenging to recruit for, or the educators who are more at risk given our current schedule.
Okay. So in terms of if you look at option 1, I would say, and this is, as Ms. Garrison pointed out, it's hard to wrap my head around when I started doing the math, but if you look at option 1, that to me is just really bare bones, because since we haven't added to our base and other districts have, and we haven't done the 4.7 and other districts have, and they're also percentages, so that compounds over time. So we really need to make up for the fact that we have had 0 state funding the past 2 years, and other districts are doing the 4.7 and we haven't. So really, if you want to go to the previous slide, if you go back to option 1, then you look at, so that's just adding that 1.3%, and we had talked with our staff about, we did a one-time stipend to our staff, and we had told our staff, we're doing long-term planning, stay with us, like when we have additional funding available, and we were hopeful that would be from the state, that we will increase the base by 1.23%. So we've already talked to our staff about that. And then looking at the 4.7, just to stay competitive with other districts, and then just looking at those other buckets, that's that $8.9 million. So really just bare bones in terms of, help in terms of what we've already talked with staff about and what I see area districts doing. But then if I really look at the data and what other schools have talked about and what I'm hearing from teachers when we're recruiting, that option 2, that we're going to need to make those market adjustments. So we're going to need to raise our starting teacher salary. Other districts around us are already surpassing us. And the way our schedule works is you receive the same schedule, step 1 through step 5. So we're going to need to look at increasing that. Now we do bargain that with the union. And so that is something I don't know where we'll land, but I know what other districts have talked about doing, and I know what other hires have been offered. So if you look at option 2 in terms of making that market adjustment, and we also know that we're on the low end with our most veteran teachers, right? And they have talked with the board about that for several years, about doing something for the top of our schedule. And other districts are $20,000, if not $30,000 higher, on that very top end than we are. So looking at option 2, I would feel really comfortable that option 2 is not going to place us as a leader. We're not going to be able to compete with Verona, and that's okay. So I really feel that we will stay in the healthy middle. The option 2 will keep us on pace where we are. It'll help us with that catch up, and we'll be able to compete with our other area districts around us, knowing that we do have to bargain our schedule with the union, and that is our job, to watch what other districts are doing and to make sure that our schedule is competitive. And then I would say option 3, what I would do is I was really looking at, okay, in terms of Verona is one of the leaders in compensation, where is their starting salary and where is their top? And what would I need to get close to that, knowing that we wouldn't have a tax base to surpass that? So I would say with option 3, you know, we would be definitely towards the top of other area Dane County districts.
Okay.
Does
so
that help?
Option 2 puts us pretty close to the middle of Dane County, and option 3 puts us closer to the top. Is that?
Yes, I would say option 3 would put us in definitely in the top third, if not, you know, one of the top leaders, whereas option 2 really keeps us in that healthy middle.
Got it. Okay. All right. And then, let's see, bus drivers. I wasn't clear. You said increase bus drivers, but are you really saying increase the pay for bus drivers, not increasing the number of bus drivers, correct?
Correct. That historically in the past, when we've provided additional compensation to staff, we've also increased the compensation to our contractors. And so we wanted to make sure that we had funding in the referendum for them, because as everybody else, their costs are increasing, and that we know that given our unique system, we've been so fortunate to not have any breaks in busing. And that we wanted to be able to continue that. So we wanted to make sure that we budget additional money so that we can increase compensation for them as well.
And does that also cover the increase that we are seeing in transportation costs, not specifically for the contractors themselves, but of the cost of gas, et cetera?
Yeah, since the cost of gas is not something that the board gets to really decide upon, we just included that in the shortage.
Perfect. Okay. I just wanted to make sure it was accounted for. And then, Andy, since you spoke up, can you explain to me how CPI will impact the numbers that we're talking about? Because in one of the slides that Dr. Bergstrom was showing us, there was a projection as to what the CPI may be for next year. And I don't recall what the actual numbers, but it was like between 6 and 8%, if memory serves.
Yep.
And so if it's 6%, how does that impact these numbers versus if it's 8%? How does it impact where we fall on the line? Does that not for state funding, but
From a salary perspective?
or from a funding perspective? If you could, and maybe I'm asking a question that you can't answer, but because I know the orange line is state funding, but if we kind of overlay local funding onto that orange line, does that get us closer to the blue line?
We really don't have any other local funding options associated with that, so it really doesn't. Yeah, there is just that huge gap, which is part of the reasons for the large referendum request.
Well, so that's what I'm talking about. The referendum, isn't that our local funding that we're
Oh, yeah.
talking about? Right.
If you're saying the thing that would make up the difference there would be the referendum, absolutely.
And does that get us up to the blue?
Well, if you added those numbers together, I guess it would get you pretty close.
Okay.
4.8 plus 3 is going to get you in there. You're missing 1 year. That third year.
Right.
But so it definitely fills a good part of the gap in.
Okay, all right.
Wait, didn't we budget, wasn't there a 5% and a 5% for the following?
Yeah.
Yes, so I can speak to that. So in terms of where the numbers came from, is we made the assumption of the 5.93% in year 1, because that's the 1.23 plus the 4.7. And then year 2 and year 3, we're making a 5% assumption, which is below what CPI is predicting. And, trying to balance keeping the best educator in every classroom and being fiscally responsible. So, and we don't have a sense of what 24, 25 looks like yet, but to Mr. LeBrun's point, that is something, once we have a little more information, then the district can adjust the levy. However, we can't go higher, right?
Right, which is my point in asking this question, was because based on what I had been hearing is we may not get to the blue line on that graph based on the referendum that we're talking about tonight, or will we? I don't know that it's a linear.
Yeah, it depends on how you would include those market adjustments. I think that's a component of that, right?
Okay.
Because that's above the CPI component. But
Okay.
yeah, I'm not saying it's perfectly matched up, but we're in the ballpark.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, I think those were all of my questions for right now. Yeah, good, thank you.
All right, thanks, Mary. Leslie, it's your turn.
So to piggyback on everybody, thank you so much for all the time and effort you guys put in for this, because this was a lot of hours and a big lift. I'd also like to thank all the community members who did come out to all of the sessions. Reading your feedback is immensely helpful to know where you're at, and so for those community members who might be watching who haven't come out and put feedback in, please, please, please do so. We really, really do take your input into consideration, and I don't know, for me personally, it makes a big difference on seeing how I would look at voting on something like this. So thank you for that. I had some questions on, can you go back a slide? So on the difference in this, I guess, is to Gina, on option 2 and 3, it's an additional or a higher level of market adjustment to the educators and staff, but also continuing this building subs position. Can you, and maybe Leslie's a better person to ask this too, can you speak to what kind of a difference that building subs position made in our schools over the last year, and what not having that might do in our classes in the future? So I don't know who wants to.
I would say our building substitutes were busy every single day. And they were the person that our principals went to first, because our principals were getting up very, very early to check all of the absences that may have come in overnight, because people don't, or their children don't always get sick on the perfect time schedule. So sometimes even when you have every absence planned and you think you're going to have great coverage, you wake up and find out there are 3 more people gone. And so that's where the building substitutes have been invaluable, because now we have one person who knows the students and who knows the classes and knows the teachers and knows where to find things and how to fill in all these small little niche things piece by piece. And that's made a really big difference. Now, would we love to have it continue for a long period of time? Yes. But A, we hope our substitute pool continues to grow so that we have more people to call in when those absences happen. And B, we also have to think about fiscal responsibility and what we need to prioritize.
Okay.
Anything to add to that, Gina?
No, just that we have tremendous gratitude for them, because I don't know what we would have done without them, given all the absences we were facing. So we're also hopeful that our absences will decrease, that the pandemic will be, more under control and people won't be out as long. And we have seen that, as the virus has changed and people have been vaccinated, that people aren't out as long as when we first started. So I think that's another component to that.
So with that, Leslie said that not having them would be, we would love to have them, but not necessarily, but we hope that our substitute pool grows. What are you seeing with that?
So our substitute pool did grow this year, as opposed to previous.
Good.
And so I am hopeful. I also know that, unemployment is very low, and the economy in Dane County is doing well. And so that is also just making it more difficult for us to attract substitutes. However, it has increased, so I am cautiously optimistic.
Okay. And then another thing, and this is kind of going way back earlier in the meeting, we under planning hours, we made a reference of that. What are our planning hours? Because we talked about where we're now at in the employee handbook and stuff. what are our planning hours look like versus other districts? Because that's an intangible, like you talked about, you know, some of the intangibles that we can do for our teachers.
Yeah, so I would say that we definitely are on the leading end of the prep time compared to other districts.
Okay. And that's across the board pretty much?
Across Dane County.
Yep.
I mean, certainly I would say anecdotally, when I go to get statewide information, I would say that Dane County is just, able to offer more prep time than maybe other rural areas that have declining enrollment and budget challenges as well. Okay. So, but I would say, what I really focus on is the Dane County market because people are really competitive and they're more mobile. And so I've felt really proud of the prep time that we can offer teachers, and I do feel like we're a leader in that area.
Okay. And then earlier in the year, we were talking about our paras and their salary versus what other areas are talking. And I know that we've been talking across the board for teachers and everybody, but I know that paras was one of the ones that we were really, really having a struggle with, what we're offering versus other places. Can you talk to me about like competitiveness and where we would lie? I don't know if I'm making it clear.
No, that makes sense. That is one area that I do feel we need market adjustments for our paraprofessionals. And that, when I talk about educators, I do mean all of our staff because we all play a role in that. But I wanted to make sure that, sometimes they don't think of themselves with that term. So I wanted to make sure for those folks that are watching that this does include market adjustments for our hourly staff in terms of options 2 and 3, that our paraprofessionals, I definitely feel that we need to do more. And if you look at our regular education paraprofessionals and those paraprofessionals work in special education, we are still at $15, $16 an hour as our entry level. And you can really, you can see the signs around this community as to where you can work and be offered $15 and $16 an hour. And so the last 2 years have been really challenging for us to recruit new people into those positions.
And just for clarity, like when you're looking at our $15, $16 an hour, what are some other districts offering their paraprofessionals coming in? Not even talking about special ed paraprofessionals, which we all know is a bigger lift.
Yes. So other districts, at least for this year, and I'm hesitant to say this because I don't want our staff to go elsewhere, but they are looking at, $18 to $20 an hour. So when you're at that level, that's really significant.
It is.
Right? So I really feel that, if you look at like option 2 or 3, that we really need to be at $18 an hour to stay competitive. And if we were to go to option 3, then you're really looking at $22 an hour. And, I say that, we wish that we could pay everyone more. I mean, some of those jobs are the most impactful jobs for our students. And so it's the reality of our funding. But again, we're very fortunate because we have paraprofessionals that have been here for years and know that they could make more money in other districts, but they stay here because of our culture and they've built those relationships, and they know, because we have been talking with them about it, that we are doing long-term planning and looking for solutions.
I'm sorry I put you on the spot with the dollar amount, and any paras out there listening, please don't leave just because I asked for the dollar amount. So, because we love you. And then I think the other ones I had questions was on like the budget shortfall, but that was answered. And yeah, I think everybody else answered those. So thank you.
Okay, great. Andy, I just have a couple questions that I think are just important in terms of board responsibility to our taxpayers. We have the slide that we looked at that we did change our health insurance. We've restructured debt. Is there anything else that we can look at financially? You've been here a long time. You've known this budget a long time. Is there anything else that we can do to lessen the burden on our taxpayers, or are we there?
I think for the most part we're there. I mean, anything of this magnitude is the problem. We are constantly evaluating budget and trying to find things that will save, some dollars. I think I mentioned before that we recently took our deductible for our property insurance from $5,000 to $10,000. That saved, $15,000, $20,000. That's great, but that doesn't reach the magnitude that we're talking about here. So we are constantly assessing those different things, which hopefully will save a little bit of money here and there. But when we're talking millions, it's something bigger.
And would you say, so, we, as Tim talked about, other districts have raised base pay using ESSER funds. Would you say that that is committing taxpayers to something ahead of time? And is that really why we haven't made that decision? Because we are not in the business of committing our taxpayers to unfunded mandates.
Yeah, totally understand why other districts would have done that in order to maintain staff and those types of things, especially in the environment that we're in. But yeah, by doing that, you are creating a larger hole in your budget in the future. We've called that a fiscal cliff, all those types of things. I think more and more districts will be talking about that in the years to come because they're going to have to cross that bridge at some point in time. We're trying to be proactive and, again, being as conservative as we can to identify these things and put things in place kind of on the front end so that people are making decisions now rather than having to react down the road.
Yeah, and I just saw today that 2 school districts in Wisconsin are actually going to operational referendum tomorrow, and DPI or WASB has already had notification that 16 are going in November. So, as we've talked about, this is not a unique problem to Oregon. I guess the thing that I'd like to end on, and I know, we're getting to 9 o'clock and we've got other things on our agenda, and this has been a really good discussion, and then this will come as an action item on the board agenda on August 22nd, because if this is going to be on the ballot on November 8th, that we do have to make that decision by August 30th, which our next board meeting, and the only board meeting we have is the 22nd. So this will come back to us. But, we've talked a lot about compensation for teachers and why that's important. But I think it's really important that Dr. Bergstrom really addresses, what does this mean for our kids? That, Gina has really talked about retention and recruitment and what happens with teachers. I think it's really important that we bring this back to people about what this means for their kids and the education for their kids. So I'd like to end there.
Well, we always like to begin and end with our students, and we began the community information session with the idea that it's our goal to have the best educator in every classroom, because that's what research says, that over all of the factors over which we have control, the quality of the educator in the classroom has the most impact on our students. And we know we have terrific educators, and we know we have the right people in our classrooms, and we want them to stay there. And when the need comes where we need to have additional people, we want to be able to attract people who are bringing skills and people who are willing to stay with us and allow us to invest in them and stay over time, because teachers tend to get better with that support and the professional development that we offer, which is another thing granted to us by our community, our professional development system that allows our teachers to have 5 additional days every school year devoted just to getting better at their craft. This is all about what's best for them, because the best teacher is what's best for them.
And how many staff people do we employ in this district? I think it's important to give people a perspective of how many people we're talking about that are members of our community.
So I would say we pay, 650 people regularly, but if I look, we send out almost 1,000 W-2s.
Okay. So that gives people perspective as 1,000 people that care for our kids. All right. So board members, we have a lot to digest. We'll ask questions. We want to hear from our community. We'll go out and seek input from our community. We have one more information session tomorrow night, but we also know that we're talking with people day in and day out to get feedback on this decision that we have on August 22nd. So thank you, our administrative team, for all this work, and we'll be back at it on August 22nd. Okay, Troy, come on back to the table. Next up is discussion item 3, sharing end-of-year survey results from the school perception survey.
Excellent. And this is, we're now sharing a little bit, a high-level result slide related to our parent survey. At a future board meeting, we will also share our staff survey, but we're going to do it in different segments. But for this portion of our discussion, I'd like to talk about the parent survey, the survey that went out to families. So what you see in front of you is a slide that was prepared for us by School Perceptions. That's the company that sends out our survey. And it's the results related to what is considered the ultimate question related to family satisfaction. And the question is, how likely are you to recommend the district to a friend or family member? And you'll note that we have a good portion of our families who are at the top end of the scale as far as extremely likely. As a matter of fact, the average answer for our respondents, and we had 795 respondents, was 810. In comparison, districts who take the survey, the comparison average is 7.26. So that puts us in the 92nd percentile of all of the school districts who take this survey. So I think that's really important information, is that our families feel, vast majority of our families feel very good about being able to recommend this school district to others. Now, we did see some really big areas of growth on the survey, and that was a significant percentage in families sharing a positive response. And the biggest areas of growth came from the area called leadership and communication. We saw a big jump there. We also saw a really large jump in the question, I know how to help my child with school, and in I feel welcome at my child's school, which makes a lot of sense considering we didn't have a lot of volunteers for a while, and now we've opened our doors and we're having our families come back in to be able to do good work within our schools. So in general, I'd say parents are feeling very, very positively about the district. The area of concern that I did note, particularly in the upper grades, was the satisfaction with the school's response to bullying. That is something that, when I look at the numbers, I think that's something we want to dig into a little bit more. And then that question also influences another question, which is something about my child's school has a healthy culture. And I noticed that the schools where there was a higher level of dissatisfaction related to bullying response corresponded with a higher number of people saying, I'm not so sure it's a healthy culture. Because those two things really do go together, right? Particularly when you're talking about social media influences and how that spills over into schools. So while the vast majority of the parent survey was news that I feel we can all be very, very proud of, I do know that that's an area that we want to dig into further because it's clearly very important to our parents. And of course to our students. So I don't know if we'd like to take any questions on that or move forward into visioning and strategic planning.
Go ahead, Leslie.
I just have one. You mentioned that our average was 8.1 and the competitor's average is 7. Is it 2.6? I can't remember. Comparison. How many districts utilize this survey that we're talking about?
Thanks. It's over 10,000 times that the survey has been administered, and the number of districts who are involved is in the hundreds. So it's a very large sample set. As a matter of fact, though, it's interesting because the leadership and communication questions, so many districts don't ask those that they couldn't give us comparison numbers. They could only give us growth numbers. However, they said in the last year, more school districts have started asking them, and we'll be able to get comparison numbers in that area soon also.
Sorry, go ahead, Mary.
So how do they get the comparison? Is it based on school size or?
I think it depends on what question you're talking about. But in general, it's of all the respondents, all the school districts that issue the survey and the response they get.
I think you can go ahead.
I'm done?
Yeah.
Oh, you're telling them. Okay, sorry. Here we go. Visioning and strategic planning. So we've seen this graphic, but what's really exciting is that we're making some pretty significant progress on filling in the graphic that's related to our strategic planning framework. In particular, we have information on what the board has now officially voted on related to priorities that will take us through 2025. And much of our time tonight has been on priority 4, enhancing the future financial health of the Oregon School District. But really, every one of those priorities that you see on the screen are interconnected. You get one when you have the other. It's really all about how all of these pieces fit together, very much like our values. Right? If you value the whole child, then of course you value educational equity and family and community partnerships. Because schools are organizations where all of these things must be connected in order to be able to give the full experience that every child needs. So we'll be excited to continue planning forward as a district and as individual schools, connected to how we will measure these priorities, and we'll be coming back to you in October as schools to talk about the plans we have for goals that are connected to the priorities and how we will measure our success. Now, all of these priorities are in service of, and I'm going to move to something that's kind of a big deal, are in service of our vision, right? Which is the portrait of a graduate. It's what we as a community, because our community gave considerable input into this, what we as a community want for our graduates. And this work has been, go ahead, the unveiling. We've been working on this for quite some time, and now we have a visual graphic that represents what our community told us. So you see, you see on the screen and on the boards behind me the portrait of a graduate that is the graphic we will be using in the majority of situations to represent the much larger ideas that are behind our 4 C's, which are competency, character and culture, community, and critical and creative thinking. So this is the graphic we'll be using most of the time. Please note for competency and character and culture that there are individual symbols that are connected with that, but you see how they're all coming together, and you see also that everything comes from competency, right? We're an educational institution, and that is really it is our primary responsibility. In order to do well in those things, we also have to take into consideration character and culture, the role of our community, and becoming a good community member, and how to be a critical and creative thinker in pursuit of competency. Now, if we want to talk about how this looks on a broader scale and how we can communicate what the community and various stakeholder groups have worked on for so long, then you can take a look at the other graphic, which includes the beginning portion of the Portrait of a Graduate policy, color-coded, of course, competency to all of the 4 C's. And then what we have in the policy in bullet point format along with the graphic. And we're excited to be able to have this and to begin using it consistently as our vision, to begin sharing it with the community, to make sure that we're putting it out in front of our decision making, just like we have with our 5 values. Because our 5 values are what we use to guide us in making decisions in pursuit of the portrait of a graduate. So these things all work together. And many thanks to Erica and the graphic design company that she led through a process that led to this final result. Something that I think we can all be proud of, and is the result of significant stakeholder input, and is not something that will not be continuously revisited in order to ensure that it's always representative of what all of us, including our community, want for our graduates. And then we'll move into teaching and learning, but this is a point at which if people want to make any comments on this.
Anyone want to make any comments, or moving on? Go ahead, Anna.
I love this. This is awesome. This is awesome. This is really exciting. This has just turned out great. I love it. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, and you have to understand, trying to find the right icons. Whew, that's a job, isn't it, Erica? So I think she did a fabulous job, and it's just really clean and concise and really pleasant to look at, and gives you a really good feel about who we are and what we do, kind of like our values have become. So way to go, Erica.
All right. Now, on to teaching and learning, which is how we make all of that happen. So we'll start by talking about the summer semester summary. I am always so impressed by the idea that we have served 1,600 students this summer. To be able to put together that type of programming is a huge thing for the community as a whole, because I think it brings a lot of joy. And it brings a lot of comfort to our families also to know that their students are receiving quality experiences throughout the summer in addition to the school year. So that's 101 classes. That includes 15 swim lesson classes. Over 5,500 individual registrations. If you include swimming, you get well over 6,000. So that's a lot of lift. So I want to say many thanks to our summer school principals too, and to the administrative leader in that, which our administrative assistant leader in that, which this year was Angie Dunn. Because remember, Nancy Baguki, who has led this effort for many, many years. This was her first year to not be involved, and it took an awful lot of really terrific people to fill those shoes. But I love how much of a team effort it is with the administrators who work all throughout July to make sure this goes well. And we also served quite a few free meals, so many thanks to the federal program that allowed this to happen. For our fall planning, normally this would be something that John Tanner would talk about, but considering there's just a few items on this particular screen that we will highlight today, I'll do this quickly. And that is, we are in the midst of an English language arts curriculum selection process. They spent the last year looking at standards and examining the new information that has come out regarding the science of reading and how well our current curriculum met the new updated standards, as well as the expectations that are coming out of a lot of research regarding how students learn to read. And what they have found through that year of examination, that they now want to look at other possible curriculums to be able to see if there's something out there that better meets the needs of our students and our staff. They're also piloting a math curriculum in grades 6 through 8. You know that several years ago we moved to Bridges for grades K through 5, and we made the decision to leave the current math program in grades 6 through 8, and they are now piloting other math programs to see if they want to make the switch in that grade band also. And of course, our professional learning in the upcoming year, the pathways, will focus on assessment and feedback and how to best communicate learning to our students and to the home adults. And finally, we are the recipient of a one-time mental health grant from Dane County that will allow us to better work with our community partners in order to service students who have needs and might need assistance with co-pays, or might be temporarily uninsured, or we plan to provide additional AOD services connected to these partnerships that are allowable through this one-year grant. So we're very excited about that. And then I mentioned previously that I wanted to talk a little bit about the second part of your directive from the last board meeting, and that is to investigate really what are the cultural components that make our district one where people want to stay. What part of our culture creates the features that make our long-term people say, I'm really glad I stayed here? So how we're going to collect some additional information on this, because we already have the school perception survey, but we plan to collect additional information to give that school perception survey some depth by holding individual one-on-one sessions with a small number of representative staff, and just ask some questions regarding why do you choose to stay here? What is it about your job that makes this a place where you're really happy that you are here. Because we spoke about this with the pandemic. We knew how hard it would be. Sometimes it was harder than we ever thought it would be. But one of the things we kept at the forefront is at the end of it, we wanted our staff to say, that was super hard, but I'd rather do hard here than anywhere else. And so now we want to have conversations with individual people to gather information about why is that? So that we can use the results along with survey results to create an action plan that continues to maintain our status as a desirable place to work and even improve our status as a desirable place to work. So that will be my job and perhaps a couple of other district office administrators throughout the month of September and October, so that we have some of that information to combine with the financial component.
Go ahead, Heather. I think you had a question.
Yeah, just a quick question on this. I'm assuming it's implied, but just to be overly clear. Great to find out why they're choosing to stay. Will there also be a part of that of what else, in addition to what we're talking about financially, could be tweaked or, changed to ensure that they continue to stay?
That'll be a part of the conversation. And there's also good information in school perceptions from that too. She's very good at that. Very good. But when you say fun things about kids, you want to make sure people can hear you, right? So here we have some pictures from our summer semester wrap up. And that was really a fun month for our students. And one thing I'd like to highlight is the creative ways our expert teachers work to instill a love of learning. Because that was really the focus for our summer semester, is ensuring our students got in touch with the love of learning sometime during our summer. And so you can see here we had everything from dancing giraffes to go along with the story, to making and throwing paper airplanes, counting and measuring the number of units flown, and then charting the results. Apparently the dancing giraffes go along with a book called Giraffes Can't Dance. And so all of this was meant to be a really positive learning experience, so that sometimes if maybe your child was in a math class and they came home and you said, what did you do today? And they told you, I made paper airplanes. Well, you kind of wonder, why did you send your child to summer school to make paper airplanes? But actually there is a purpose behind that kind of activity. So it's really about finding ways to put learning into things that kids think are really fun. And that's always our goal. It's just that we get to be really creative with it in the month of July. We also want to talk about how Greene County Fair top honors went to two students, Gabby and Gabe. They recently earned top honors at the Greene County Swine Show. Gabby finished top blue in the weight class with her entry, as well as champion of the senior showmanship class. With this honor, Gabby will be one of the 2 representatives competing in master showmanship. And Gabe finished second blue in his heavyweight class for entry, the reserve champion heavyweight, and the 5th overall barrow of the Greene County Fair. And you can tell by the picture that we're talking about the animals they entered into the competition. So they show their animals as an extension of their agricultural educational experience, and they've been managing and working with the animals for 6 months in preparation for the fair. So they put a lot of time and effort into this competition, and it shows. They scored very well, and we have a really rigorous and healthy agricultural program within our school district. We also have top music honors going to Charles Critch. He was accepted into the symphony session program at Birch Creek Music Performance Center with, get this, only 55 other students from across the country. So many congratulations to Charles Critch. And then you might have been seeing some of these adorable pictures on social media. we have a summer social media campaign called #OHS Big Orange Chair. And the chair itself is a gift from the class of 2022 and is currently in front of the high school. And through this social media campaign, we've been encouraging people to take pictures of their children in the chair. And then we've been having some fun on Facebook with some of these pictures, and you can see that they are absolutely adorable. And the chair will be outside throughout summer. So if you send it a picture to us, it's at social media, one word, at OregonSD.org, and we'll publish your photo. Here's another round of Big Orange Chair. So, you know what's really going to be fun is when some of these kiddos are graduating from high school and we can pull up these pictures of them in the Big Orange Chair. So that is a wonderful way to end our session tonight.
All right, thank you. That's always fun to end that way. So F, closing, future agenda. I know we all know what's our future agenda topic for August 22nd. Just as a note, Gina and Leslie and I will also be meeting this week to talk about the school board calendar year, so we can kind of plan out what the next year looks like. So we'll get that calendar out to everyone too once we kind of run through that. I've had conversations with the committee chairs too in terms of what's on the docket. So we'll get that out so everybody can kind of have a look ahead. All right, it is 9:25, but we're going to do a checkout. Anyone? Leslie, we'll start with you.
Just thank you all again for all the hard work you do, not just on like the financial piece, but on all of the work you do, because, you know, you take the really tough things and you can kind of show how you're trying to help our kids with them. So thank you all.
Anna. Mary.
I'd like to echo Leslie's comments. You guys work diligently all year for our kids, and it shows. It's one of the reasons that we are a destination district, and it's appreciated.
Heather. Troy. All right. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Motion carries. We are adjourned at 9:25. Thank you, everyone.